All right, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started with today's policy session for the Phoenix City Council for January 10th, 2017. There is a quorum present of the Phoenix City Council, and Councilman Valenzuela will be acting vice mayor for today's meeting. I'll ask Vice Mayor, are there any consent items today?
No consent agenda.
And how about a call for an executive session?
Mayor, in accordance with a properly posted notice and agenda, I move that the City Council pursuant to Arizona Revised Statutes Section 38-43102A meet in executive session on Tuesday, January 24, 2017 at 1 p.m. in the East Conference Room, 12th floor of the Phoenix City Hall, 200 West Washington Street, Phoenix, Arizona.
We have a motion, we have a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That item passes unanimously. Mr. City Manager, do you have any reports and or budget updates today?
Not at this time, Mayor.
Thank you very much. I'll now turn to members of the council. Council information and follow-up requests. Does any member of this council want to provide information and or follow-up requests? Councilwoman Stark.
Thank you, Mayor. Maybe you should mention why Danny is our vice mayor, acting vice mayor, because Kate had a baby boy named Michael. 4th of January, I believe it was, Zelda, right? I'm trying to remember what day it was. Yeah, so congratulations to Kate. I want to welcome everyone here and say Happy New Year. Since our last policy, I had the chance to attend the Senior Volunteer Recognition Luncheon. And I found out at that luncheon, our mayor is a dancing fool. This man knows how to dance.
Emphasis on fool. Yeah.
And I also want to congratulate who used to be the councilman for District 3, but is the new County Board of Supervisors, Bill Gates. We attended his swearing in on January 4th. It was a lovely ceremony, and we're happy to see Bill over there to help forge our relationships with the county. And upcoming, I'll be attending the Moon Valley HOA meeting tomorrow night, and Stephanie will be, in my office, will be attending the Black Mountain Community Alliance meeting tomorrow night. And I hope everyone can save the date for our next District 3 community chat, which will be about our new Phoenix at Your Services. This is the one-stop system for reporting service requests to all of our different city departments. And that will be on January the 30th. We're still working on the location. That's it.
Thank you very much, Councilwoman Stark. Other members of the City Council? Councilman DeCiccio, please.
I have a couple. One, this is our first meeting of the year, and I want to thank everybody for all the work that they put into it, and I hope everybody's had a very safe and a very happy Christmas, Hanukkah, holiday, whatever you want to call it, New Year's. It was just, hopefully this year is going to be a turning point. 2016 was a little rough for some people, and it was rough for a lot of people, I guess, and in particular, our police officers. And so I know we've got a lot of police officers in the room here. I want to thank you myself for everything that you do. Hopefully that this is going to be a better year for you. Across the country, we saw police deaths, the highest that they've ever been, assaults on police officers, the highest that they've ever been. And it was just, I think a lot of it had to do with a lot of the rhetoric that was going on out there, which made them easy targets. I hope 2017 we see less rhetoric from some people in our community and try to find ways to work with our police department. They've done an exemplary job, and we see it every day. We've had police officer involved shootings. Now, as council members, the mayor and council, we always get reports of what's happening in our city while we're sleeping and while we're enjoying our families. There's always somebody out there protecting us. And so, and I see the police, the fire department here as well. Appreciate everything you do as well. But the police department in particular just had a very rough year. And let's just hope and pray that they have a better year in 2017. I think a lot of it will do with what the public does and how they respond to our officers. And what I've told people, it's okay to go up to a police officer. Matter of fact, I strongly encourage it and say, thank you for everything you do. Thank you for protecting us. My kids do that, and I think we see a lot more children doing that, and parents ought to do that a little more themselves too if they get a chance. The Principal for a Day is going to be March 6th, and it's something where leaders throughout the community get real involved in our schools, and they get to be a principal for the day, and they get to see how hard it is to be in a classroom setting. Anyone who realizes how hard things are, all you have to do is be a teacher. Those teachers, especially teachers that we have in our community, they're required to be the mom, the dad, the guardian, the disciplinarian. They're required to do all these things, and then they also have to teach our children. A lot of times these kids are with these teachers more than they are with their parents. And so I think this is a great opportunity for us to realize how important it is and what impact these teachers have had in our lives. The citrus for the community, on the Village Planning Committee, an individual by the name of Barry Paisley is on our Village Planning Committee. He actually ran for this seat against me, but we've turned out to be really good friends. But he just does an amazing work. He started off the whole citrus collection, especially in Arcadia. So Arcadia residents can start collecting and then drop off their donations at the food bank. And it's going to be the Super Citrus Saturday on January 28th. And St. Mary's Food Bank, they're going to have trucks set up around the valley where locals can drop off the citrus in their neighborhood. In particular, this is going to be happening in Arcadia. And I don't know how many of you have lemon trees. You only need one lemon tree for an entire neighborhood. You don't need that many. They're very prolific. I've got 2. And so every year I have to pick these things, and I leave them out there. And people do take them, thank goodness. But if you've got citrus, and instead of letting it die on the vine, and if you're not going to be able to eat it or be able to take care of it, please find a way to donate it to people that would love to eat those. There's also going to be a book signing at the Be an Artist Studio on Friday, January 20th, and that's on 4025 East Chandler Boulevard. And it's going to meet, and you get the chance to also meet internationally known artist Sandra Marshall, and the event is free to the public. That's it, Mary. Thank
Thank you
you.
very much, Councilman DeCiccio. Other members of the council? Councilman Alkowski?
Thank you, Mayor. 2016 was great for District 7. We had all kinds of new construction in downtown Phoenix, from apartments to condos to 2017. We're looking at our first grocery store in downtown Phoenix. And I want to welcome Dunkin' Donuts. That's going to open tomorrow, right off of Central and Adams. They're going to be open 7 days a week from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. So if anybody wants donuts, we got a Dunkin' Donuts in downtown Phoenix. So things are happening in downtown. Also, I'd like to invite everyone this coming Monday to the Martin Luther King March that starts right there on 14th Street in Jefferson, right at Pilgrim Rest Baptist Church. It starts about 9 p.m. We start off at the church and make our way through downtown Phoenix all the way to Margaret Hans Park, where it's a great celebration. There's all kinds of a day on instead of a day off projects where people throughout the city of Phoenix are painting, cleaning, and helping out in the community. So it's a great time to not take a day off, but actually get your children and get yourselves involved in the community and giving back. And if you have a chance, come on down to the march and our Margaret Hans Park and come celebrate this great civil rights leader that has made so many changes in Phoenix. Also, we'd like to invite everyone down to the 10th anniversary, and it's going to be a big celebration for the Cesar Chavez Library right there at Cesar Chavez Park on 35th Avenue and Baseline. That's going to be Saturday, January 28th from 1 to 4 p.m. We're going to have a petting zoo, cooking demonstration, all kinds of food, and just come on and enjoy yourself. If you haven't been to the Cesar Chavez Library, it's one of our greatest libraries out there. The view's great, and the park's wonderful. So come on down to the Levine area and come enjoy. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much, Council Member. Other members of the City Council? Council information or requests? Councilman Valenzuela, Vice Mayor.
Thanks, Mayor. I would like to congratulate a good friend, personal friend, but also a friend to the city, Jenny Poon, founder of Cahoots. She is the 2016 Business Journal Business Person of the Year. I think it's just really exciting to have someone like Jenny highlighted. Jenny is the co-founder, along with her husband Odin, of this organization that is Cahoots. It has a foundation arm. They're focused on education, tech, innovation, social entrepreneurship. So many times these entrepreneurs who are creating these businesses around tackling an idea that overall isn't just good for our economy, however, that's incredibly important, but good for the community. And there is a social aspect to it. So it's great seeing Jenny and really the Yes PHX ecosystem highlighted and recognized by the Phoenix Business Journal. So again, congratulations to Jenny and everyone at the Cahoots family. I'm really proud of all of you. On Saturday, January 14th, it is the long-awaited Arizona Latino Arts and Cultural Center mural celebration at 147 East Adams Street. The alley mural is complete. It's exciting. I went and met with ALAC just a few days ago, and they plan on using this mural as a tool to educate our community and specifically our children. And you know, it's exciting to see the new leadership come in and some of what they want to do in the community. So that's great for Phoenix. I would also, lastly, but very importantly, I'd like to welcome to our office our new council aide, Mia Sanchez, who is here with us. Mia joined the District 5 team as our council aide just before the holidays, coming over from County Attorney Bill Montgomery's office, where she was the Community Affairs Coordinator. Mia received her undergraduate degree at ASU in Urban Planning, and she earned her MPA from GCU. And so Tony Mottola and Vanya Guevara and Jake Swanson and I are very, very excited to be working with Mia, and welcome to the team. Welcome to Phoenix, Mia.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair. Other members of the council? Councilwoman Pastor?
Yes, Happy New Year. It's great to see everybody and exciting for 2017. Just want to let people know about the Earned Income Tax Credit event Wednesday, January 18th at Metro Tech High School from 6 to 8 p.m. This is a free hosted event by the City of Phoenix to help low to moderate income families file their taxes and receive their fair share of tax refunds. Tuesday, January 24th at 8:30, Coffee with Laura and Chief Williams at Longview Neighborhood Recreation Center, 4040 North 14th Street. Looking forward to discuss the first 90 days with Chief Williams and all the exciting things that are happening within District 4. Then at 10:30 that day, I welcome anybody that has dances Zumba. We will be having Zumba at the Women in Leadership Wellness Expo at 10:30 at the City Hall in the atrium. So you can come join me, and we will be doing a great Zumba dance. And today, one of the things before I get into the next piece, I really would like to mention that we lost a young warrior within our community. I think he was 7. He went to school with my daughter, Sophia, but many of you know him as Hollis Doherty. And so he lost the battle to cancer, and I just want to send my shout out to their parents and the family and friends that are rallying with them, because it was a long journey for him. But he definitely was a high-spirited young child, young boy, and definitely provided a lot of hope to many. So those are my thoughts with the Doherty family. And then I get the great honor to introduce today the city's inaugural, I'm like, oh, emotional, city's inaugural poet laureate, Rosemary Dombrowski. As an educator, you know I'm very much aware of the importance of language and literacy, especially at the younger ages. And so if there's one thing that poetry does, it teaches love and language. And so this will be great for our city to teach us some love and language and how we can all get along and work as a community. Last April, during the National Poetry Month, we had a public art installation on 7th Avenue on the Melrose Curve, which featured poems written by 2 local poets in collaboration with students at Osborne Middle School and also Marist Schools. And so I'm really excited about this, especially with our community. And most importantly, many of you know, if you're a really good storyteller, It's a way to self-expression through language, and it helps our interpersonal skills or be able to tell a story or a difficult story or a lighthearted story without our way of crafting. And so this is a great way to learn to craft our personal stories, but also to learn to craft how we can communicate with one another. So welcome, Ms. Dombrowski. I look forward to your reciting a piece of your work.
Thank you, Congresswoman Pastor.
Rosemary, I just want to say congratulations to you. At a kickoff event a few weeks ago, and the selection
Thank you
through
again.
Councilwoman Pastor's committee is awesome. And so, yeah, I wanted an opportunity for you to tell a little bit about yourself, your work, what motivates you. Introduce yourself to not only the members of the council, but to the Phoenix community, because you're going to be out there a lot. That's the whole point about having a Phoenix Poet Laureate, is to have you out in the community really promoting poetry in our city. We'll be a better city for it. Rosemary.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mayor Stanton and Congresswoman Pastor, who were both on the selection committee as well. Thank you for your multiple gracious introductions. I'm a lifelong educator. I've been with ASU for 18 years. I've also been working in the community for over 10. I'm the co-founder and co-host of the Phoenix Poetry Series. I run a small local press called Rinky Dink Press that focuses on micro poetry specifically. I'm going to be tabling at the Phoenix Public Market for the rest of the year, though maybe not in July. So if you're interested in what small presses are doing in the community, you can stop by and visit us at the Phoenix Public Market. I try to get my ASU students out into the community as often as possible. I tell them that writing in a vacuum doesn't really benefit anybody. If they're writing about social justice, if they're asking those difficult questions, they have to get out into the community and at least read those works and pose those questions to the community. We have downtown showcases at least twice every semester, always located at a downtown coffee shop. Hopefully, I'm going to be branching out and working with the Phoenix Union High School District within the next couple of months, assessing their needs and desires, finding out how both myself and my ASU students can service their population. I'm going to be working with the Phoenix Downtown Neighborhood Alliance, introducing them to poetry. They've already invited me. They seem excited. I mean, I'm trying to trick people into reading poetry again, and I think it's going to work. I think I'm going to be successful this time. I'm going to be working at the Local to Global Social Justice Conference at ASU as well. My students are going to be reading at that as well. I'm going to be participating in Wind Up Wednesdays in Civic Space Park, which is not just limited to ASU students on the downtown campus. It's open to the public. I'll be down at Tucson Book Festival this year as well, hopefully representing Phoenix and poetry. I wear polka dots a lot, so I think I'm pretty visible. You know, I'm almost like one of those runway guides at the airport. Anyway, I think the importance of poetry is that it's a vehicle for anything and everything. It's a vessel for everything and anything we want to say, any way in which we want to express ourselves, and any topics that we want to broach. And I think if the community has a voice, even in just that artistic space, ultimately that gives the community a larger voice overall. So I'm hoping that by reaching out into various arenas of the community that I haven't been working in before, I can be even more impactful.
Well, first off, thank you for accepting the offer
Thank
to be
you.
our Poet Laureate. I've had a
Thank you
chance to
for
read your
offering.
work. It is awesome. Anybody watching that's interested in Rosemary's work, Google A Love Letter to Phoenix, one of the best pieces written about our city. If you ever are questioning whether you're in the right city, read that work of
you.
Rosemary, and you'll see you are living in the right city. So I look forward to seeing you out in the community, doing lots of poetry readings. Maybe you could work a little bit with our city staff, because the city council reports tend to be a little dry. And
Absolutely.
we could use a little poetry in our city council reports.
I'm here for workshopping as well, absolutely.
I'll turn to
If
the
you
county-
just make that stuff a little bit more lyrical, I bet people will read it, so.
Any questions?
Thank you
or
again,
comments? Thank you so
everybody.
much, Rosemary.
I
It's going
appreciate
to be
it.
awesome. Thank you so much. All right, now any other members of the council would like to give any comments or updates? All right, we'll move forward with our agenda. We have 3 items on today's agenda. Item number 1 is a item relative to our economic development strategy. We haven't had our economic development team before us on their strategic approach and getting input from the city council. Then we'll have a budget status update. And item number 3 is a potential developer reimbursement in the Ahwatukee Foothills area. So now I'll turn it to Mr. City Manager. How would you like to introduce our economic development strategy item?
We're very pleased with the economic development team at the city, Paul Blue as the deputy city manager, and Chris Mackey, who's our economic development director have done great work together, and they want to bring to you an update on the council-adopted goals from last year. So I'll turn it over to Paul.
Mayor and members of the council, as Ed said, we're here to discuss with you today your adopted plan and the results that have occurred across this year, and then our expectations of where we want to try and proceed forward in next year. Chris and her team have done great work, which will be outlined in her presentation, and so we look forward to sharing that with you. Chris?
Thanks, Paul. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. We're excited to be here today to talk to you about the activities that we experienced over 2016 and talk to you about where we will go in 2017. In accordance with your 7 broad adopted strategies from 2014, staff regularly updates its strategy policy for each individual year. We keep them kind of grouped in baskets to work on those broad policy strategies that you have. We do focus on all 13 employment corridors to make sure that we keep relevant product for companies looking for new space and companies looking for new placement for their employees. We work closely with our private development entity, whether it's for a build-to-suit or whether it's for speculative development. We focus on community redevelopment, because if we don't keep our eye keenly on redevelopment and redevelopment opportunities, the new development just falls by the wayside. Our new urban tech, as you've seen in the downtown market, we've seen a significant entry of technology companies into the central city. We've seen Double Dutch and Gainsight and Galvanize and others move into the central city. On the higher education growth, we saw the law school open with ASU. We've seen the health sciences partnership building under construction with U of A. We've seen Grand Canyon University and its corporate headquarters just completing. And of course, our community colleges group that continues to grow and expand and help our workforce. On the entrepreneurship side, we saw Cahoots expand into Midtown. We've seen Galvanize move into the downtown market, and the department continue its expansion. When we look at job creation for 2016, our staff was intimately involved in creating just over 15,000 new jobs into this market. These are in-base industries. They do not include retail nor construction. These are full-time permanent jobs in this market. So we've seen over 2014 more than a 200% increase in new job creation. Some of the companies that we brought in new job creation, we have 29 new companies that have moved into the market. Some of our largest that we've seen, and this council, of course, worked diligently with us to bring them in to the market. We saw Farmers Insurance come into corporate headquarters in Carlisle and Kudelski that have moved into the market. As we mentioned, Double Dutch, Beacon Medical, and others that are new companies into Phoenix. Not to be outdone, our existing companies are our single most important focus that we have in this market, and I do want to thank Mayor and Council. You spend a lot of time with us doing retention expansion visits to ensure that our companies continue to grow and thrive here in Phoenix. We did 658 visits this year, and those resulted in some pretty significant expansion of our companies. Just to put kind of a percentage on that, of those 658 companies, 60% of them needed some assistance from the city, whether it was from workforce development, they had a permitting issue, they needed a traffic signal, they didn't know where to find some assistance at the county or the state. So these visits are critically important to ensuring our companies continue to grow here. One of our biggest, of course, was the retention of BMO Harris and its corporate headquarters, relocation from the One Camelback building into the former Viad building. The economic impact of the jobs and the projects that we've created in 2016 was $1 billion in new capital investment into this market. Those jobs created $600 million new dollars of revenue, of payroll dollars, into the city of Phoenix, and just over 3 million square feet. Now, mind you, that's not all the projects that built here in Phoenix. These are the ones that this council and the economic development and other city staff were intimately involved in ensuring that they grew here in this market. Not only that, we assisted over 23,000 job seekers who were looking for a job. That would be at our Business and Workforce Center or at one of our one-stop centers outside the city. So really excited about the 23,000 people we helped that were looking for jobs. What's next for 2017? Our goals for 2017 are to create 10,000 new jobs into this market, do another $1 billion in new capital investment. This year, we're going to even go bigger, about 1,000 new visits with our existing companies and assisting 22,000 job seekers that are looking for new jobs. Again, our economic development staff can't thank you enough. You work diligently with us. You do media missions into New York and San Francisco and Chicago. You help us when we bring in companies into the market. You graciously meet with them. You assist us on our familiarization tours to ensure people truly understand what Phoenix is all about. And the work that you've done is paying off. We are seeing activity levels that we've not ever seen before in Phoenix. So Phoenix is hot. I think it's going to continue to get hotter, and with that, I'd be happy to take any questions you might have.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Mackey. I'll turn it now to members of the council. This is not an action item, but rather for information and discussion. Are there any questions or comments from members of this council relative to the update on our economic development strategy? Councilwoman Williams.
I want to thank all of the staff that's been involved and congratulate you. I think you were named Woman of the Year for Business Development, if I probably don't have the title quite right, but I think you are focusing on the right things. I think it is extremely important not only you go out and recruit new businesses, but the retention and expansion of our existing, I think, is extremely important. You exceeded my expectations, and I am eager to see what you do next year, this coming year. So thank you for all the hard work all of your staff has put in. You have an extraordinary team, so congratulations.
Thank you very much, Councilwoman Williams. Councilman DeCiccio, please.
Just a quick one, if I could, Christine. You had mentioned that there were 15,000 new jobs. Is that 15,000 new and retained, or is it 15,000 new, and then how many were retained?
Absolutely. So it is 14,000 new jobs and 1,000 were retained.
Oh, okay, good. All right, that was just some clarification.
Yes.
Thank you, good job.
Thank you very much, Councilman DeCiccio. Councilman Valenzuela, Vice Mayor.
Yeah, I'm excited. What a great update. Thank you, Chris, and congratulations on your recognition. And I think anyone who knows Chris, she immediately gives a recognition to everyone else who's part of the team. But what I have an opportunity to work with the CED team quite often, and specifically around tech, innovation, entrepreneurship, and those types of companies, and which I think is the very foundation of what we do here and moving our economy forward. What I find interesting is, regardless of whether I'm speaking and meeting with, a CEO in this city, a president of university, or someone who is just starting up, literally looking for space because they believe in what they're doing, they have this idea, they're a new entrepreneur. Regardless of who I'm speaking with, they all know who Chris Mackey is. And they all know who the members of the Phoenix CED team is. And it's because of all of the work that you do. And it shouldn't be a surprise, I don't know if it is, that we do have 15,000 new jobs and counting. But at the end of the day, it comes down to just taking or being considerate, being accessible, regardless of whether, again, it's a CEO or a president of a university, or someone with this idea may need a little direction and wants to start their business right here in the city of Phoenix. So thank you so much for being so open and accessible.
Thank you very much, Vice Mayor. Councilwoman Stark.
Thank you, Mayor. And again, kudos to staff. You've done a great job. I was talking to Mr. Blue maybe a week ago a little bit about some of the strategies in these areas that aren't necessarily revitalization areas or blighted areas, but we're seeing commercial go by the wayside. Could you talk a little bit? I'll use the example of 7th Street and Bell. Fry's left there and they moved to a new location, and now we have a big empty box and actually a great center. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about the strategies and how you're working with planning and development on it. I think it's a great idea, but maybe we need to talk a little bit about it here today.
Absolutely, Mayor, Councilwoman Stark. Our retail and our vacant retail centers and our struggling retail centers are probably some of our greatest focus. They're areas that can become a cancer very quickly and move into the neighborhoods and drag the neighborhoods down with them. We do have some, and not even older areas that are still very thriving, that are seeing those areas go vacant. And while the council is very gracious in giving our team the kudos, without planning and development, they are our secret weapon. So as we're moving through the process, as we're bringing new companies in, as we're looking at new opportunities and strategies, Alan's team is with us every step of the way and helping us every step of the way. So as we look at those vacant big boxes, as we look at the vacant, we lovingly refer to them as Oscreens VS and Osco Walgreens or CVS, kind of that same building. How do we reuse those buildings? How do we look at the market in the area? We run gap analysis to determine, is this an area that can support more retail, or should we be looking at an adaptive reuse? Do we turn it into education uses and office uses? They have significant parking. We did bring on a retail strategist this year who will be leading our new retail efforts under Lori Collins. And so we will be working even more closely with planning to really identify those underperforming areas, such as the Fry's, where Fry's just moved out at 7th and Bell, and looking, how do we get something back in there very quickly so we don't see that struggle and become an even greater challenge. So we would be happy to come back to you with that strategy and be pleased for input on that. That is a keen focus of ours moving into 2017.
Thank you very much. Any other comments? Councilwoman Pastor, please.
So as we made great strides and have moved forward, one of the areas that I have great concern about is, and I would like to know what job creation was done was on the west side. How many jobs were brought to the west side, meaning Maryvale area? What jobs, what businesses were we able to bring in? And in addition to that, there are many open box properties that still haven't been filled with some vibrancy. And so I would like to know some of those areas.
Mayor, Councilwoman Pastor, absolutely. I don't have the exact list with me today to be able to read to you. These are the ones that went into Maryvale and kind of west of I-10 in that area. We did see some significant job creation, particularly south of the 10, kind of west of 35th Avenue. And I'd be happy to get that exact list with you and walk through that. We do still have some big box vacancy in that area, and we are working diligently to bring good quality jobs into that Maryvale market. We've had some good meetings with your constituents. You've led some great business forums and some great conversations on how we can really help in those areas. And I will get you those exact details so that you can see what we're doing and some of the, not only that, but kind of exactly what's available and what we are working on marketing today.
Thank you very much. Any other comments? Councilman Nowakowski, please.
I just really want to thank staff for having that Team Phoenix approach. I mean, we looked at Desert Sky Mall and they were closing the doors. All the anchor stores were moving out. And we went in there and we worked together with the owners of the mall and said, the whole area is changing. It's becoming more Hispanic, so why don't you create a concept that attracts the individuals that live in that area? And it's really sitting down and having those types of conversations and realizing what would work, and that's the expertise that our staff brings. It's not just one department, it's all the departments coming together and making it happen. So that's just one example in my district that we were afraid that Desert Sky Mall was going to go away, and we were able to save it, and now it's a little over 20% profit margin from before. So I just really want to thank you for all that effort. And it's about customer service, and that's what it's all about. It's about going out and reaching to those companies, those CEOs that we have that are doing business right now, and making sure that they know that we're here to help you. We're here to be a part of that team. And it's just incredible that 60% of those visits came out of some type of improvement. As simple as a stop sign, as simple as Amazon needing some help with our Phoenix PD when it comes to the Christmas time and coordinating traffic. It's those simple things that sometimes help us to create those relationships and expand those businesses. So I just really want to thank you for all that. And also thinking outside the box. We're looking at the 202 going into the that Loop 202 freeway. And we're thinking outside the box also. What type of businesses do we want? Do we want some high-quality jobs and, you know, looking into the tech business and maybe creating a corridor where we can attract some of those tech businesses into the Levine and west side of our city. So it's just amazing working together and bringing all the stakeholders together and just really thinking outside the box, and I call that the Team Phoenix approach. So once again, thank you for everything you're doing in the downtown area, in the Levine, Estrella area, and Maryville area of our cities and of my district. And it's just incredible that Phoenix is hot, District 7's hot, everything is, it's a place that people want to do business, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilman Nowakowski. Any other members of the City Council? I just want to say thank you, Chris, for that strong update on how we're doing from an economic development strategy. Mr. City Manager, Chris and her team, are, in my opinion, are doing an outstanding job. It's a very, very difficult job to balance out the interests of the City of Phoenix, of protecting our existing companies, growing jobs in those existing companies, working with the entrepreneurial community, working with neighborhoods throughout the community to balance business and neighborhood interests, dealing with international affairs, is what we also ask this department to do as we try to increase international trade, particularly with our friends in Mexico, and of course attract new entities, including corporate headquarters, to our city. And I think Chris and her team do an outstanding job successfully balancing out all those interests and successfully succeeding in all of those areas. So very much appreciate your success, and no one outworks Chris and her team, and that doesn't go unnoticed. And I, as mayor, and I'm sure the other council members get the same experience. Probably no single member of our team or department gets more compliments when we're out in the community than this department for their outreach, consistent and positive outreach to the community. So thank you for your leadership. Any other comments by members of this council? With that, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. Item number 2 is a information discussion item, not for action of the City Council, but this is our early budget status update. In years past, we have asked our city manager to give us regular updates on the status of our budget throughout the year. So this is not an annual event, but still, as we begin the annual budget process before the community meetings, et cetera, this is an opportunity for our city manager and our budget director to report to the City Council and the community as to the status of our budget at this time. So, Mr. City Manager, I hand over to you.
Thank you, Mayor, for that introduction, and also thank you for structuring this agenda so that we have the economic development before the budget, because it's really important. The foundation of our budget is the economic vitality of the city, and so it's good to have that reminder as you structured the agenda. So as you said, we're here with an early status report on our preparations for the 2017-18 budget, which starts in July. And as you noted, this is a part of the council's direction to receive regular ongoing updates on the budget so we can plan properly to preserve services that Phoenix residents value. I want to thank the Budget and Research and the Budget and Research staff who are here for their hard work on this. And as you noted, this is not an action item today, but information and discussion. In the process, each month this year, we will have further information for you, which builds towards the trial budget in March, public involvement in April, and final decisions as laid out in the charter and in the state law in May, June, and July. The overall message I want to send today about this budget is that preparation pays. And as a result of our preparation, we have a 2017-18 balanced budget that is coming into focus. And that doesn't happen by accident. It happens because together we faced the data early. We took repeated, deliberate steps to address what that data told us. Over the past 2 years, you've set a path to preserve services, restore employee compensation, and resume hiring police officers. A year ago, our five-year forecast predicted that without action, we faced a deficit between $9 and $30 million. And in this world, you either let things happen to you or you make things happen, and we chose to make things happen. And with that sustained effort over the past year, we've significantly reduced the number from $9 to $30 million deficit to a balanced budget in projection, as Jeff Barton will tell you in just a minute. We do know that, again, this year, we need to prepare ourselves for 2018-19 because public safety pensions have been on a 10-year path of significant increase, and those increases are accelerating, and that leaves us with some future challenges. And we'll spend some time at the end of the presentation talking about looking there. But for now, we'll focus on the 17-18 balanced budget. And I'll turn it over to Jeff Barton, our Budget and Research Director, who will talk about this year's work.
Mayor, members of the council, good afternoon. Thank you for allowing us to do this presentation this afternoon. As we look ahead, as the city manager mentioned, today's presentation is really the first of a series of discussions that we'll have over the next couple of months as we refine our budget and go through our budget process. The first thing I want to do, though, is level set and kind of give you some background information. And this is really for those in the audience and those watching from home. First and foremost, the City of Phoenix is required by both state charter and city charter and state constitution to adopt a balanced budget. That means that our resources and our expenditures must be equal to one another, and that's what we'll be discussing over the coming months. So, as we discuss, first and foremost, our resources. Like any puzzle, the budget is essentially a large, complex puzzle. And like any puzzle that you've worked on ever since you were a child, it's always a good idea to start with developing the frame and filling in from there. For the operating budget, our frame are our general fund resources. Our general fund resources consist of the following: our beginning fund balance. Our beginning fund balance includes those savings or those carryover savings from prior fiscal year. For example, in September of this year, we actually came back and talked to you about how we saved $10.5 million in fiscal year 15-16. That money carries forward into the current fiscal year and elevates our beginning balance. The beginning balance also includes our contingency fund. Our contingency fund in the current year 16-17 budget is roughly $48 million, or 4% of the operating budget. And we'll discuss that in a little more detail also as we go forward in this process. And finally, the beginning balance also includes any set-asides. The set-asides in this year's budget include the $30 million that we set aside for year 2 of our employee compensation, as well as the money that was set aside to address body cameras. Our general fund resources also include one-time and reoccurring revenue. Largely, these things come from taxes and fees. For example, city sales tax, state shared revenues or state sales tax, income tax, and vehicle license tax. It also includes the primary property tax, as well as user fees and other resources. This slide graphically illustrates the allocation or where those dollars are coming from, those resources. As you can see, roughly 38% of the $1.2 billion that is in our operating budget revenue comes from local sales tax. Approximately 32% comes from state shared revenue, 12% from that primary property tax, 10% from user fees, and roughly 8% from other resources. As we drill down into this a little bit more, this slide illustrates for you city sales tax collections over the last 10 years, inclusive of the budget. And as you can see, since 07-08, we've gone from $408 million to roughly $425 million estimated in this year's budget. That's a $17 million increase, or roughly a 4% increase over 10 years. This slide really illustrates how long it's taken us to get back to 07-08 levels. This slide shows our 10-year history of property tax levy. This is both primary and secondary, but again, you can see from 07-08, we're down roughly $30 million. That's a 10% decrease from 07-08 levels of property tax, and that represents 12% of our general fund resources. So after we discuss our resources, I want to give you a little background information on our expenditures. As you know, we have a zero-based budget process. That budget process includes or incorporates a review that our staff is responsible for doing alongside that of the fiscal section of every single operating department in the City of Phoenix. We go through a very detailed technical review where we analyze every single line item in the budget, cost center by cost center, department by department, to evaluate and project the current year expenditures, as well as to level set next year's base level expenditures to provide the existing services that our staff are providing today. In doing that, we look at all personnel costs, all contracts and supplies, all interdepartmental charges, all equipment and minor improvements, as well as the contingency fund. And we'll discuss that a little bit later in this process over the next couple of months. We'll give you a lot more information on these items. This slide illustrates the 10-year operating budget for the City of Phoenix from a general fund perspective. And as you can see, we've increased from roughly $1.2 billion to $1.22 billion over 10 years. That's a $23 million increase, or roughly 1.8% over 10 years. The increase in the current fiscal year over last year is largely made up of restoration of employee compensation, as well as pension cost increases for both COPERS and PSPRS. And we'll discuss both of those items in a lot more detail later in this presentation and throughout our budget development process. Another way to look at our general fund operating expenditures are really to look at how those dollars are allocated from a programmatic standpoint. What this slide illustrates is, I think it demonstrates exactly what the council as well as the public has told us repeatedly, that public safety is number one. Public safety is the primary area of responsibility for the city of Phoenix. And from this slide, you can see that in 07-08, the general fund was approximately 65% of the general fund was allocated to public safety criminal justice. That amount has increased in the current fiscal year budget to approximately 75%. This slide also shows the allocations for community development as well as community enrichment. That includes our libraries, our parks, neighborhood services, human services, and those other services that our public has come to rely on. So again, that kind of gives you an overview of our budget, our operating expenditures, as well as our resources. What I want to do now is take you back, as Ed mentioned, as the city manager mentioned a few moments ago. A year ago from this time, so back in February of 2016, we presented for you a 5-year forecast. That 5-year forecast projected or depicted a potential deficit for fiscal year 17-18 of $9 to $30 million. However, because of the direction of this council and the hard work of our City of Phoenix employees, we are now confident that that budget deficit has largely been eliminated. And what we're showing now in our early status is a balanced budget to a potential shortfall of roughly $5 million. The range there is reflective of the fact that we still have not yet set all of our revenue estimates, and we're still continuing to evaluate our expenditures. We'll continue to work on that over the next few months, and we'll bring that information back to you next month in more detail in the 5-year forecast, and ultimately you'll see a balanced budget in the trial budget on March 21st. With that being said, a projection of a balanced budget means that any new demand for increased services or expanded services will require shifting existing expenditures or additional new resources coming into the picture. So again, over the next few months, we'll spend a great deal of time talking about 17-18 and our assumptions for 17-18. However, there are certain things that we will spend a great deal of time talking about because we see these as being the most impactful on the 17-18 as well as future budgets. These things include our contingency level, our revenue outlook, infrastructure and other capital needs, our service levels, and compensation and pension costs. So first, we'll talk about our contingency fund. As you know, the contingency fund is essentially our rainy day fund. This council, several years ago, made a conscious and fiscally responsible decision to increase our contingency fund to get to 5%. And as you can see from this slide, we've doubled our contingency allocation from fiscal year 04-05 to the current year budget. It's gone from $24 million to $48 million. That's 4% of our operating budget. As we continue in our budget development process over the next few months, what we will discuss with you are what do we do with the contingency going forward? Do we increase that on percentage basis? Do we increase it by dollar basis? And how does that play out with the overall level setting of our operating budget? Next, revenue. So before I really get into the details of revenue, I want to emphasize and reiterate yet again, we continue to work with the consultants from the University of Arizona, our expert economists, to refine and hone our revenue estimates. That was a direct recommendation of this council, and it's proven to be extremely useful. Over the last couple of years, you've seen our revenue estimates get more and more accurate as a result of this interaction. Where we are in the current fiscal year, our 4-month revenue actuals, based on our 4-month revenue report, which we sent out last month, we are currently tracking exactly to budget. And so again, that's encouraging. However, what we do not yet have are holiday sales tax collections. We should be getting those over the next couple of weeks, and that's really important and critical to our revenue estimating for the current year as well as our base year, because it gives us a real good, strong indication of the health of our economy. Next, we've got a series of issues which we're identifying as being state issues. Number one, as you know, TPT reform, or transaction privilege tax reform. The state mandated a few years ago that they would collect all taxes for cities and towns in the state of Arizona. That went live just a few weeks ago. We're continuing to monitor this because some of our taxpayers elected to start paying early in this fiscal year, and we had some timing issues. So we're continuing to monitor that to make sure that those timing issues don't become a normal thing for us in our monthly reviews and collections. We're also wanting to make sure that the information that we receive is accurate, just like all the other cities and towns. Glendale wants to make sure they don't receive any Phoenix revenue. We want to make sure we don't receive any Glendale revenue, and vice versa. And we also know anecdotally there's been some discussion at the legislature about making additional changes to contracting sales tax. Based on changes that have happened before, we know that that could be a problem for us from a general fund perspective. Last time changes were made to contracting revenue, it took us about a year to come out of a negative growth pattern. And that's important because contracting sales tax revenue represents about $20 to $25 million of general fund resources. And finally, we know income tax has been an issue at the state level currently. JLBC in their last several fiscal highlights letters have indicated a decline in corporate income tax collections. Why is that important to us? Because what the state's collecting today will be shared with us 2 years from now in fiscal year 18-19. And as the city manager mentioned to you, we're already looking ahead to fiscal year 18-19. So if they're experiencing declines in corporate tax today, we'll see those declines in fiscal year 18-19. So again, we're continuing to monitor these things. We'll incorporate any refined or additional information that we have into future discussions with you over the next few months. The third item that we see as having a potential impact on our operating budget, not just for next year, but for the next several years, are our infrastructure and other capital needs. As you know, our City of Phoenix employees are responsible for providing a variety of services to our residents of Phoenix. They provide those services out of a variety and a large number of city facilities. As those facilities age, the requirement to provide additional maintenance funding is imperative. It's required to ensure that those facilities are operational, that those facilities are safe for those that are coming in to do business with us, as well as for our employees. We've been in discussion with Public Works for the past several months, myself as well as the finance director, to identify a series of projects that need to be evaluated and incorporated into future budgets. Those projects will be brought back to you in more detail over the next couple of months, and we'll incorporate those into our discussions. But just to name a few, again, City Hall is one of these major facilities. It's approaching 20 years old, or 25 years old. That facility is in need now currently of elevator enhancement or refurbishment. We also know that that facility also is in need of fire life safety system upgrades. We also know that throughout the city, our badging and security access system is also starting to get to the point where at some point in the future, it will be no longer supported. So we need to address that. We plan to incorporate all of these projects as well as the funding needs into future discussions with you, and we'll bring those back as well as recommendations on how to fund those projects and how to incorporate them into the budget. Likewise, technology. Just like facilities, our technology gets old. We've got a variety of highly sensitive and systematic technology systems that work throughout the organization to ensure that our employees can provide those services. One of these services would be our fire computer-aided dispatch system. As you know, fire department is responsible for dispatching for pretty much all of the state of Arizona. They do that through a mutual aid agreement. They share the cost of dispatch with all of those cities that participate. The system that they currently use is about 20 years old, and it is in need of upgrade. So we've been in discussion with fire, with finance, and with IT on how to move forward with that upgrade. Right now, the cost is estimated at about $16 million, but again, that would be shared with our about a 50-50 split with all those mutual aid partners. But again, we'll discuss that later as well as other things in the budget process. These next two things go hand in hand. As this council has made it a priority, we've accelerated the hiring of police and firefighters, police officers and firefighters. That accelerated hiring is placing a strain on an aging vehicle fleet. So over the next few years, as we know the number of officers on the street and the number of firefighters on the street, we'll have to put additional funding into our vehicle funding to ensure that we have ample vehicles for our firefighters and police officers. And finally, the last item that I'll talk to before I turn it back over to the city manager are our service levels. Again, a zero-based budget is what our budget system is consisted of. And any zero-based budget requires programmatic reviews. Our program budget process, we go through every single year. In that process, all departments are asked to evaluate their programs and their services. Those programs and services, they're asked to evaluate them from the standpoint of which programs could you give up if forced to balance the budget, which programs can you identify operational efficiency to enhance those programs, as well as which programs would you like to have more money if in fact we had a surplus. That process is now underway. Again, given the fact that we're anticipating a balanced budget, any expanded services or any additional services will require shifting existing expenditures or adding new resources to support those demands. In this year's program budget process, we've asked our public safety departments to submit 2% budgetary reductions and our non-public safety departments to identify 5% programmatic reductions. Again, given the status of our budget, which we think is balanced, we don't anticipate taking these cuts. However, we like to ask for them because if something changes in the economy, if we hit a hiccup, it's always good to plan ahead, as Ed mentioned. It's always good to have that ace or that feather in your cap, and you can pull it out if needed. So that's what these will be used for. And with that, I'll turn it over to the city manager, who will discuss the last item.
So the fifth item on our list has to do with employees, and of course, we talk a lot about budgets and services, but it really gets down to the people who deliver them: police officers, firefighters, graffiti busters, auditors, you name it. So there we go. Compensation and pension costs. Management recommended last year and council approved 3-year labor agreements to restore compensation for employees, which has been very important in the quality of our service for employees to see that their compensation is going back over a 3-year period to 2010 levels. We set aside some money last year, we set aside some money for next year, and in the third year, we will have to identify the resources for the third year of the contracts. The next issue related to that has to do with our pension, and this is really the one I want to spend a little time with, because as we talk about a balanced budget in view, we have found ways to address these issues, but as we look forward in the future, we need to be mindful. The increase in the City of Phoenix Employee Retirement System, or COPERS, which is our civilian pension system, for next year is $1 million. For public safety, which is the Public Safety Personnel Retirement System, the increase for next year is $57 million. That is significant pressure that we found ways, because we've been prepared and we've been preparing, to address. But as we look forward, we need to be mindful of that. So just to drill into it a little bit more, this talks about the employer rate that we pay for civilians. In other words, to the pension system, the city has to send a certain amount of money to account for the pension of civilian employees. At the far left of this chart is 2007-8. So this is a 10-year history of the pension rate. So in 2007, 2008, it was about 12%. So for every $10,000 of pay, we would send $1,200 to the civilian pension system. Over this 10-year period, that has grown to 32%. So for every $10,000 of pay this year, we send $3,200 to the civilian pension system. Now, this is legacy employees. This is what we call Tier 1 employees, those hired before 2013. Now, what I'll show you is a story of the impact of responsible pension reform adopted by this council and by the residents of Phoenix. This is the line that just showed up that's blue and then turns to yellow. That is Tier 2 and Tier 3 employees. Pension reform in 2013 is shown with the blue line that starts in 13-14 and transitions with the pension reform of 2015 into the yellow line. So the gap between the two is 6%. That's the impact of reform, is that it has saved the employer pension rate 6% between Tier 1 and Tier 2. It's expensive, but the council has taken steps to address it. So that's civilians. Now, if we show the same issue of the percentages for public safety, this is what we have. The lines are very close. The red is the fire pension, the blue is the police pension. Those are state-administered pension funds governed by the legislature. They are separate between police and fire for the city. So back in 07-08, the rate was 20%, thereabouts for both. That has grown to, in 17-18 at the far right, the police officer pension requirement will be 67% of pay. So for every $10,000 of police pay, we have to send $6,700 to the state pension fund. And for fire, it's 62%, so 6,200 out of every 10,000, for every 10,000, we send an additional 6,200. So this is very significant impact on our budget, which we have been addressing, because as I said, we've been preparing for it. To show it in terms of dollars, that growth is pretty dramatic. The blue is the civilians, 40 million on the far left 10 years ago, $85 million this year. The orange is police and fire combined, $56 million 10 years ago, $149 million this year. And next year, the pressure's greater. It grows by $1 million, as I said, for civilians in blue, and by $57 million for police and fire. So we've got our work cut out for us on the statewide level to address this growth. And this is happening across the state. This is not just Phoenix. Another way to look at that, what that means, and this is the pressure we felt. The left is the amount of revenue that we had increased between 7-8 and last year when we had actuals. So over that 9-year period, we had $37 million of revenue increase, difference, over 9 years. In that same 9-year period, our costs for pension increased $95 million. So we absorbed $95 million in $37 million of revenue and a whole bunch of other things that this council has had to do in terms of service, efficiency, and those sorts of things. But that's a significant amount of pressure on us as we move forward. Our costs are under control. Our non-pension costs are under control. I have to say that again. Our non-pension costs are under control. What this shows, I'll walk you through it. The left side, again, is our 10-year path. 07-08, what we spend in the general fund on everything but pension, that's salaries and contracts, but not pension, was almost $1 billion, $997 million. That was significantly dropped starting the next year and on through. And as you see the last 4 bars there on the right, we are right at about $876 million consistently over the last 4 years. That's for everything we spend in the general fund except pension. So we don't really control pension in the same way that we control our other costs, because we have to pay a bill sent to us by the pension systems based on actuaries. So the things that we can control, we are really doing a great job in doing that. And that comes because you guys have insisted that we do that, and we really had staff working hard. So I think this is important as we move forward. We have the mechanism. We know how to control our costs, and we do that. And in those last 4 years, we've actually been able to expand some services and add things that are important to the mayor and the council. But what we have to do over the next 18 months is, as we have focused on the fact that we're almost at a balanced budget status right now for this next year, we as staff are going to start working to develop solutions and alternatives for you on through into the next year. And that's the calendar that we'll follow in the next 6 months, as we said. And Mayor, with that, we'd be happy to answer questions and have conversation.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. City Manager, and our Budget Director, Mr. Barton. We have one citizen who's submitted a card for comments on this. We'll take that first and then turn it to the council for questions and comments. Ms. Greta Rogers, did you have comments on the budget status update?
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council, and to each and all of you, I wish a happy, prosperous, and healthy new year. This report is encouraging and very upsetting. Upsetting from the pension end of the deal, and I won't go into it any further than that. I came here today, I've spoken to Ed Zerker about this, and I've spoken to Paul Blue about it. For the upcoming budget year and the following budget year, I want this city to budget funds to bring the police department to full complement within the next 2 fiscal years. As far as I'm concerned, there's no negotiating with Greta Rogers. And I know that doesn't mean to hoodly-hoo to you, since I have no legal authority. But I'm speaking for the city of the whole. This department has operated short-handedly for 8 years now, understandably. And they've done it cooperatively and in the spirit of providing the best public safety that they can, and we have been fortunate not to have any serious public safety failures. And I commend the whole police department for this. I checked to see if fire also needs people. They're operating at complement, and they have no trouble evidently recruiting and training new people when they have attrition. I want this accomplished in the next 2 fiscal years and to be budgeted thusly. And if other departments have to take a little less than they were accustomed to last year and the year before, so be it. They're not going to fail. I want you to support this for the benefit of the people you represent. All of us. That's what you're elected to do. And public safety is your primary obligation as council members, and you know that very well. So in that spirit and charge to you, I will thank you and hope you will keep this trust and carry it forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rogers. I have no other cards. Is anyone here in the audience wishing to testify on the budget status update that the city manager just presented? Okay, now I'll turn it over to members of this council for any questions of our city manager or our budget director. Councilman Waring?
Thank you. So it doesn't have a, excuse me, page number on it, but this, Ed, can you see it?
Yeah, we'll go back to that.
So you and I talked just this morning, and we've talked in the past about the budget situation. Yes, that one. So the 207 million and the 86 million are striking. But when we were talking this morning, I didn't have this chart in front of me. Did you say, so for 2018-19, does it go up I know it's a guesstimate, at least another 88 million? Is that what you told me?
No, we don't have the rates yet for 18-19, but our best forecast is that it will go up, but not by that amount, I don't think.
Yeah, we're still working, Councilman, we're still working on those estimates. We'll bring those back to you next month when we do the 5-year forecast. At this time, we don't estimate it to be that dramatic of an impact, as you see here from 16-17 to 17-18. We do know that there are some actuarial changes that PSPRS actuaries are still making and building into the 18-19 rates, and we won't get those for quite some time. But you will have, in next month's projection, a breakout going forward of what we anticipate.
Of what you think, so next month
I think I
you'll
talked
have it.
about maybe 25 to 30 million instead of 58.
Okay, maybe I got,
But
we were
again,
talking about a lot of numbers,
We
so.
just don't know.
And then the lawsuit that I guess the state lost, that cost us how much? And that's the year that hits, right?
So the lawsuit that was just decided at the Supreme Court was called Hall, which had to do with what aspect of the pension, Jeff?
That was PBI and COLA, I
So
believe.
The cost of living for retirees.
That is actually built into the rates that we've got now. So the actuary built a lot of that into
So
the
this
current
chart
rates.
reflects that?
Yeah,
Okay.
it does. Now, it doesn't reflect, again, Councilman, 18, 19, and beyond, the
Understand.
impact that would have at that point, but it does incorporate that based on what they've done, as well as their reform mitigating certain aspects of that lawsuit.
And then we also have to pay, if not a lump sum, we have to sort of back pay. That's not reflected in this chart, or it is?
The rates that they gave us should be the rates that we need to pay to make sure that we hit the normal cost for their actuarial assumptions. That should incorporate that payback amount. They're still working on the mechanics in terms of how those dollars get back to the employees, but that should be reflected in the rate.
And it's still a dramatic increase. So let's say if it's 30 million, that's about what, 3% of our $1.2 billion budget, assuming it's about
2.5.
You know, that's just gone before inflation, before anything else. That's just, you know, that is just $30 million. That's a boatload of money.
That's
For
the
frame of
nature of these
reference, the
fixed
food
costs,
tax brought in
yes.
55. So it's more than half the food tax would be off the table before you get into inflation or anything. You talked about hiccups. Heaven forbid there be any of the next couple of years, because, you know, we got the 3-year labor contracts. I didn't think that was necessarily the best idea, but they're there now. So that takes us through, we're in 16, 17, so it's 17, 18, and 18, 19. So the year that is not on this chart, the next year that we're talking about, the $30 million increase.
That's
stuff
the
built
third
in,
year of our labor
will be the
contracts.
third year.
Yes.
So if there is a hiccup, I mean, we're locked in. There's not a whole lot we can do without, I guess, employee concessions, which I assume is what happened, you know, before, I think was what happened before I was here. But that's, it's worrisome, to say the very least. And this trajectory, it's just, I don't know what we do long-term. It's just not sustainable. So I'm just curious, and I think you were talking about brainstorming for the next year about kind of an action plan to address it, because you can't, even if it was 3% every year, you're just chewing up everything in the path, because our revenues really haven't gone up dramatically over a decade. They're a little higher, but they're not dramatically more.
This is, I think, a statewide issue, and because it's controlled at the state level, they're going to have to be continued dialogue at the state about what the solutions are with the statewide public safety pension system. This is not unique to Phoenix.
So, I mean, the thing that, I mean, people watching this at home would rightfully say, well, you guys have made pension reforms. There have been a couple things on the ballot in 2013 and 2015. I think both were in the spring. The 2015 one I thought was misguided and wrong, but the 2013 one did save the city money, as you highlighted in one of the other charts that you showed. But the statewide voters would probably think, well, didn't we just vote on something last spring? And I guess the message that they're hearing here, through no fault of their own, that's a more statewide issue, as you suggest, is that not only didn't solve the problem is really still escalating, and we're still going to have to address it. My concern is, having just had a big rollout of a well-intentioned and, you know, modest gains were made by the vote. I think it was Prop 124 from last May. You know, I hope people don't have the impression that solved the problem, because, I mean, at least from the Phoenix perspective, it certainly didn't. I can't speak for other cities.
Well,
Is that a fair statement?
One thing about pension reform is that it takes a long time to take effect. And that's just the nature of how the Supreme Court has defined what you can do legally to pensions. Because pensions cannot be changed for existing employees, it always has to be for the ones who start afterwards and move forward 30 years.
I think they defined it that we can't do anything. I think that's basically, is that a way to sum
pretty
up?
much, yeah.
Take the legalese out
That
of
would
it.
be-
Can't do anything for the people who are already here.
That would be the Hall and Fields decisions. I think without pension reform at the state level that has happened, we would be looking at worse things in the future. I'm not sure how comforting that is when you look at this, but it's got to be a series of continued steps and continued thought, and it's going to happen with all the cities together, because it affects all of us.
I'll answer that. It's not that comforting, because we're still facing a heck of a mess with increasing demands for services, bigger city, people want more police and so forth. That's why we have to, and we talked this year about having a balanced budget, but I would implore the council, look at every single dollar this year, because we always seem to base the budgets for next year on this past year. So if you add stuff in, or you buy some doodad, and you got to hire people to run it, then that's something that's in the base for next year. At least that's the way it always seems to work out. So, you know, the time to start addressing this is this year. If you know you can't make your mortgage payments, or it's going to get demonstrably tougher a year from now, don't wait till next year at this time to address it. Start addressing it today. I always applaud your efforts at innovation. You always make a big deal about that, and I think that's very correct on your part. But it needs to ramp up when you look at these charts.
Yes, it does. And again, because we started preparing last year with our 5-year forecast for this year, it's the same story. We need to start preparing this year for beyond. Absolutely.
Thank you. Oh, thanks. Sorry.
Councilman DeCiccio.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. And Ed, I'm going to push back just a little bit on some of these as I would on these financial issues when it comes back. When you're saying that we can only control those things we can control, and we're just not going to be able to control that because it's another person's problem, that's almost like saying we can control the vehicular budget in our household, but we can't control the household budget. I mean, it's just, you can control that. You can control the pensions. If the city of Phoenix has complained about this for years on years on years, and we've had every opportunity to influence the state and to work with them on it and come up with a plan and work with them on that, but we didn't do that. We went along with whatever was being done at the time. So if there is complaining about what's happening at the state level, what's the solution? You can't say it's theirs. I mean, what recommendations have we provided that would help us? I mean, I know you're not ready for that, and I'm not going to ask you to do that today. We got to be thinking about that. So what would those be? And the problem is whatever it is we make those decisions on, the real solution to this is never easy. And it requires people up here to take votes on things they don't want to vote on. You know, but I'm okay with that. I think you need to do that. If you look at what's happened in our budget situation in the last several years, the city of Phoenix has funded a lot of things that are nice to have, but they're not necessary to have. Greta Rogers, and I don't always agree on things, but she is true, what she says is the primary function is to fund protecting the public. That's it. That's our primary function in government. You got to protect your neighbor. You just got to do that. That is the primary function we have. But when we look at this budget, this is just primarily general fund monies. You know, I would like to see a little more transparency with that, because when you look at it, when you look at all the other dollars that come in to fund other functions of government, like our housing, we get some money for parks, some money from street transportation. You add those monies in from the federal, state, other monies. So what I would like you to do, if you don't mind, is show me what we have budget-wise with what we have here from internally, but then all those additional dollars are used to fund other areas and other departments. I'd like to see what those are and what that looks like department by department, and see what changes up there, if it does. The other part of it deals with the, and to finish on the pensions, and I've talked about this for some time now, you can fix them. Okay, these are not, the current employees that are there, I'm going to have to agree with you on that. There's not much you can do, and I think Councilman Waring and I look at that. But moving forward, you can fix those. You have to be willing to do that. Even with ours, I mean, if you look at the total pension costs that we have here, Jeff, and I've mentioned this before in other meetings, I really like to see not just what the pension costs are, but what the total retirement costs are. That's what the public needs to see. Last year, I believe we were at $319 million in total retirement costs, when our total pension costs, I think, were right around $150. So what I'd like to do is see, with these projections that you have here in place, what is our total retirement cost in the city of Phoenix, and what is that? You know, and then also explain to the rest of the council, if you could too, for those that might want to know, in the public, you know, what all is included in those total retirement costs. So I'd like to get a breakdown of that as well. I got them last year. I'd like to keep doing that, because I think we ought to see things in its entirety. The total funds in the budget, I'm going through my notes here, total retirement costs. Oh, when it comes down to revenue, we've had a philosophy here, and it doesn't work. Okay, you've got, and I've actually been writing on pensions and total costs and what government does and how it takes money from the public, and it basically takes money from the poor. Because what ends up happening is, as your expenses continue to escalate like this, and if you're revenue-based, there's no company that can survive on a revenue-based model only. It doesn't work like that. You have to go past this revenue thinking. You have to think of outcomes-based. That's what makes you successful, if you see outcomes-based projections. So as you go up like this, you start squeezing more. If your credit card continues to go up in cost, what's it do? Your minimum payment is higher. And as that minimum payment's higher, it takes more from your family income. And then you can't go and ask your boss for a raise. Can't do it, because your boss is generally going to say, you can't come in here every week and ask for a raise. So as that continues to escalate like that, you start seeing a shrinking down of what you're able to provide in services. True pensions are going to eat it up. It does happen. But there's also a structural imbalance where you have a structural deficit imbalance where you're going through this every year. We're going through this process. I actually Googled and found out what a structural deficit is. It's something that it's more than a one-off situation. You keep facing it year after year. It's okay to talk about it, but it's okay for us also to make these tougher decisions. For example, the city of Phoenix, over many years, we've allowed the primary function that we have is what? Policing, public safety. Allowed our police department to get to the position that it is today. It's not their fault. It's not the chief's fault for pulling people off and putting them into patrol. It's not. It's everybody else's fault that made those decisions. Everybody up here made that decision to do that. It's not theirs. So if you look at the other things that we funded, and I love our public relations people, and I do. I mean, I've used you guys before, and I like our lobbyists. I mean, they do a good job. But the thing is, it's not a critical strategic function of government. In particular, the lobbying end of it at the state legislature. We could easily pick up that part of the end of it. That's what really the political types are supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be out there lobbying. We're the ones that should be doing that. You got the League of Cities and Towns that's supposed to be doing that as well. We spent, I think, close to $5 million or $4.5 million in public relations alone throughout the city of Phoenix last year, so I don't know what it's going to be this year. If you start adding those things up, I know it doesn't come from the same budget, but it's the mentality that we can do these things and allow these things to happen. For example, and I use this as an example, that $9.875 million the city of Phoenix spent educating people on trash. I mean, on recycling. Well, it's a nice thing to have, but where should those monies have been? You don't need to do those things. Whether it comes from one budget or it comes from the public works budget, it doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is it's a mentality, it's a change. And until we get to a true strategic plan, which rank orders functions of government from highest and most important, and I know some of the people in the fire department have always been mad at me, but the bottom line is they are a critical function, a strategic function, and that's what you fund first and go all the way down. When we look at this, when it says public safety, it throws everybody under the same bus. That's not all police and fire only. That's everything that's included in there, their support services and everything else. So when you do a strategic plan, what do? What you do is this. You say, is this or is this not a strategic function, and where does it rank order on all the other functions of government? You rank it from highest, most important, to least important. Then you know those areas that you can move out of the budget and you can change. That's how you start changing your structural deficit. By piecemealing it and allowing to have happen what's happened over the years, you're going to have the same problems, and it's going to happen year after year after year until it becomes, like Councilman Waring said, a small hiccup in the budget or in the economy creates a major crisis again. And then we're going to be going back to the employees, going back to the police, going back to the fire department and saying, oh, by the way, guess what? We got a problem here. We're not going to hire anymore. We're going to let these people go. Well, government doesn't let anyone go. But the bottom line is that until you fix it, until you do a strategic plan and make a determination whether or not it's a function of government, then if the answer is yes, then is it a function that we should be doing, or should someone else be able to do that at a less expensive price? It's not that complicated. A small print shop does this on a yearly basis. We should be doing that too at the city of Phoenix. And I'm going to keep saying that, and I'm going to keep talking about it, because whether it is not a Republican or Democrat issue, conservative or liberal, it doesn't matter, because you should care. The fact of the matter is, if you want to see more services for the poor, that people in need of dollars from the services from the public, you should want these reforms I'm talking about, because this is going to be a crunch. You're going to get crunched year after year after year. Sooner or later, you can't take any more. You're going to bleed out the public. And you're going to start seeing this in other areas where they're going to be taking every penny they can from every department, because that's a revenue thought mentality only. It's not an outcomes-based. Thank you, Mayor.
All right, thank you very much, Councilman Cicio. Councilman Waring, please.
So you talked about, I guess, basically a dollar for pay would equal 7 cents in escalating pension costs. So is it a fair statement that every time a dollar in pay raise is given, there's an extra 67 cents? I could think that would only be for police and fire. In the general, that's a 67 cent hit in addition to the dollar pay raise in the general fund.
Every dollar of police pay requires a 67-cent payment to the public safety pension, 62 cents for fire. When we,
What is it for?
for
the-
civilians, for legacy civilians, it'd be 32 cents, but for newer civilians, it would be 26 cents. But when we cost the labor contracts, we take that into account. Those labor contracts
Right,
are
no, I assumed
costed
you do,
with that,
right.
yeah.
But it's still, it adds more to the general fund than it would appear when you're just voting for not voting against the contracts, but when you just vote for the contracts. It escalates, it exacerbates this problem.
Well,
I'm not saying don't get pay raises, that's not the point of this exercise. When you do, it really, it directly affects these red and blue lines.
It affects them, but it doesn't, you voted on the contracts with the full cost given to you. So it wasn't like the 67 cents was a surprise cost. When we negotiated the contract and recommended like 1.3% restoration, the cost that was given included the civilian and the.
I'm not saying it's a
public safety.
surprise you pulled a fast one. I'm not saying anything like that. I just don't remember anyone, including myself, holding up this chart and saying, wow, this is adding to this problem. We don't know how to address this problem that's already here yet. Should we be adding to it? It's just a point that might want to be discussed, I guess, 2 more years from now when we're doing more labor contracts. That if we haven't gotten a grip on this, and as Councilman DeCiccio pointed out, I guess you'd have to go to the state to address it, and I don't know what the appetite for that's going to be, given that they went through a lot of hoops last year to get that thing on the ballot to begin with. I would also say to something he said, I think, Jeff, maybe you'd be the person to ask. I think may not be the best recovery in the world. We could debate that all day long, but aren't we in like year 8 of the quote-unquote recovery?
Correct.
So, I mean, 2009 to now, it's hard to believe a couple of those years counted, but they apparently did. I mean, economic cycle being what it is, I don't know. So we're rolling the dice. We're going to get to year 10, really almost 11 years of straight, basically, economic growth with these labor contracts, because all this is predicated on just normal, we're saying we've got a problem with just normal, the way things are right now. It doesn't even take a dramatic downturn like we saw, almost a decade ago now, to have a real disaster. Even a small downturn would really put us in a bind. Is that a fair statement?
That's a fair statement. Again, when we do the 5-year forecast, we talk about potential deficits and ranges to encompass, hopefully, any sort of a recession. But again, you can't model for a recession because no one knows when a recession is going to hit, how long it's going to last, or how
But you know
severe
when
it's
it's going to
be.
hit at some point. What's the longest we've gone in the last 100
I
years?
can't answer that question.
I don't
Councilman.
think it's probably much longer than this, really. Of economic expansion. That's extremely worrisome, just because that's something that is sort of out of our control, and would really have a pretty serious impact. So, again, the things that we do now with this budget this year and future labor contracts and stuff really have long-term ripple effects. Councilman DeCiccio talks about that a lot. Every time we hire an employee, we're taking on an obligation for it. The way people are living now, I mean, you're going to have a lot of these employees living to be 100, or their spouses, for a system that was set up for people not to make it that long. Not that we're rooting against, but we're all in that same boat. You're living longer, retirees are having those issues, and the city's going to have it too. And I just don't see how it's going to get better unless we make more decisive, dramatic action than anything I've seen right now. In 2013, we took the steps that were the least of what we could have done. By far the least, really. There were hundreds of millions of dollars we left on the table in 2013. In 2015, we gave back quite a bit of that money when it was unnecessary. Made some good changes, but overall, I thought took basically a step back. I didn't really understand why, other than I guess the unions asked us to. Voters voted for it, so I guess I was wrong. But we just can't take any more steps back. The clock is ticking. In terms of the city did a great job of managing COPRs and so forth, the thing that we can control, I would actually vociferously disagree with that. That should have been addressed long before I got on this council in 2011. The handwriting was on the wall, and nobody did anything. It took till 2013. And then there was some indication, pish-posh, we don't need to put anything more on the ballot. 2015, there was something on the ballot. 2016, there was something on the ballot in this issue. So it seems like this issue hasn't gone away. We could go back and and look at some of the public statements that were made at the time, certainly it has not solved our collective problem, and it's going to continue to impact us for years to come. It's discouraging. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilman. Councilman Williams?
Thank you, Mayor. First, I want to talk a little bit about the pension and the reform. With all due respect to Councilman Waring, we were trying to take action that early. It was like a waltz. We'd take 2 steps forward and the court would knock us back, or something would happen to us. And it wasn't until we were able to put some items on the ballot that we could really sustain a positive flow in our direction. So I understand, and the pension is extremely difficult and is the underlying terror in our budget today as well as in the future. But I have on expenses, let me talk about that. In all of our departments, whether they're outside of the general fund departments, the public safety, I would like to have you don't have to do it today, but I'd like to have you tell me by department, are their expenses wholly, I'm not sure how to say this, contingent upon grants or other funding, so that there's no bleed into the general fund from some of the positions or some of the activities in those departments? Have I got you totally confused?
Are you speaking enterprise departments?
No.
No?
No, I'm talking like the housing, all the others except public safety.
You're asking about positions that are supported by grants.
Could be.
Okay.
But are they 100% supported
No.
throughout the department on everything they do?
That we're not cost sharing, that we're not.
Yeah.
In other words,
that
you're
we're-
asking, is the general fund paying somehow for the housing department, which is
Right.
basically 100% federal funded or self-generated revenue?
Or, I mean, there's all kinds of departments that have a situation like that. Human services. And I would like to know what the breakdown is and if they're wholly covered under those grants.
Okay.
Because if we're
Understood.
paying it from some other revenue in the city, I want to know what revenue. If it's not general fund, where's it coming from? And I also think that as we continue during the year, I know I've been part of it, we've added positions and we've added programs. And never once has anyone that I can recall said, oh, but that's going to cost this much for a position to cover it, or this much for the clerical part of it, or paper, travel, whatever. I've never, ever seen a recommendation saying, if you adopt this, this is what it's going to cost you, and where do you want to take it from? Because I think it's extremely important that as we go along, I mean, our intentions are good, however, we just keep adding and adding and adding, and I've seen that all year long. And I'm guilty of it, I admit it. I've also been part of that system. But I think it's even more critical in the future that everything that comes forward, or any new program or any new service, that we are well advised of what the cost is going to be, short-term and long-term. And we need a recommendation from us on what we want to cut to fund it. I don't think you ought to be able to add anything, make any changes in that budget once it's there. I agree. I think according to the forecasters, the recession is due in another year is what they're predicting. And I think we're going to be in a big, tough place if we haven't made some substantial decisions on where this budget's going. I think we have to be realistic that I think your holiday sales are going to be pretty disappointing. When you look at it over the last 10 to 12 years, it hasn't grown as it should have. And I believe a lot of that's online sales, and I don't know if you're working with the state. I notice on many of the things on the web, it says add sales tax if you live in these states. I never see Arizona talking about And the cities have got to come up with a way to recoup those losses from those sales. Whether it's construction, we know the communications. Look how much that's dropped because everybody no longer has landlines. But I don't see what we worked to replace it with. I mean, government is expensive. Even when it's bare bones, it's still expensive when you look at the big picture. And we have to have the sufficient revenue, and I think we have to look out into the future and understand that the revenue coming to us continues to decline proportionally to what it has in the past. And you either make huge, significant changes in the way this city operates, or you come up with some additional revenue. And I think you have to understand that. I have people say, oops, pardon me, oh, put the food tax back on. Well, that's not a solution. I think what's been said already is the fact that we have to make some hard choices, some structural changes, and that also includes income as well as reductions. So I am anxious to hear you come back with some of the recommendations and some changes in our procedures on how we do things in the future, because I think it's extremely important. We're not always the most knowledgeable or want to recognize some of the costs associated with what we do. And as far as public safety is more than just police and fire. I admit they are essential, absolutely, you will have no question. But public safety is also basic infrastructure of the city. It's our water quality, it's having safe streets to drive on, to have lights on those streets so people are protected and neighborhoods are safe. So I think it's easy to just say police and fire, but when you talk about public safety, it's bigger than just that. And I think we need to conclude that in our future conversations. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councilman Williams. Any other members of the council want to give comments or questions? Councilman Waring, do you have some additional comments or questions?
Briefly, sorry. So while I appreciate people might have been working on the pension issue, they didn't address it. It took years, way beyond what probably should have been necessary, because this should have been an apparent need. So on this chart, Ed, the difference between 2007, 2008, and 2015 and 2016 in terms of the pension payments outstripping general fund revenue increase. So first, part of the reason I mentioned that, we're in year 8 of our upturn, if that's what you'd call it, if you're expecting revenues to just dramatically take off, I mean, that might happen, new administration, who knows, but it's more likely to go the other direction, probably if you just look at it historically. I don't have that chart in front of me, but I'm sure there's a chart out there that shows, we're kind of, stock market's at 20,000, it's way up. Is that going to continue? Is all this stuff going to continue? But to the comment about the food tax, go ahead, reinstitute the food tax if that's what you want to do. But that's still, I think, correct, does not cover the gap between the 37 million and change general fund revenue increase and the increase in pension expenditures. So that may hold for a couple of years. That may get the city over the hump, but you'd have to keep it, instead of 5 years, basically in perpetuity. And even then, if the pension costs keep going the way it's going, and the general fund revenues don't even go down, they just keep going the way they're going for the last decade, you're going to outstrip it pretty quickly. So that's not going to solve the problem either. I mean, is that a fair statement? Because I'm looking, I think the food tax is about 55 million, and this difference here is about 58 or 59.
Well, we haven't recommended any specific things, and food tax is not it. I think what this chart is trying to illustrate is we're not doing this on a revenue-based system. If we were, well, we're not, because it's 37 million of revenue, and we covered more, almost 3 times that amount in other expenses by force of will and examination of what we do and how we do it and what we're providing. So we're doing that. I think the food tax depends on how you implement it, but it would probably come close to that gap on an annual basis.
But the gap keeps going. I mean, the gap keeps going. That's my point. I mean, it might cover a couple of years or a few years,
Sure.
but eventually the gap
And our
It
efforts.
blows right by that.
Our
the way
efforts
it's
on the
going.
other side can never stop. To Councilman Williams's point, we got to keep going back through and back through and back through and back through and examining how we're doing our work and finding those efficiencies. But
All right, thank you, I'm done, Mayor.
Mayor.
Councilman Williams, please.
Thank you. Please don't take my comments as if I was suggesting we implement a food tax. The point I was trying to make was although the perception, I think, for many of our constituents is, oh, that would solve the problem now and forever. And the point I was trying to make is, it doesn't. No, I wasn't saying. Okay, because I mean, I'd love to have another 30 to 55 million, but I don't think that will long-term ever be a solution. And I don't necessarily think that's the way to go about it. I think we need to look and be creative, or look at the way we're structured. Thank you.
Councilman Valenzuela, do you have something?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Ed, thank you for the presentation. Jeff, thanks for the presentation. For what it's worth, I think Jeff Barton's one of the superstars in this city. Definitely more than just an up-and-comer, so we're glad to have you, Jeff. Just a couple of thoughts here. And I have, I hope everyone on this council realizes how much I respect each of you individually. We may disagree, but I do respect each of you very much individually. And today I'm hearing some of the messaging, and while I agree that we need to figure this out, I disagree in the fact that so much is being said without any solution, without the talk of any solution. Governing is hard. It's hard work to govern, and it's not just sitting back and pointing the finger and kicking the can down the road and saying, the council before me should have done this, and maybe the one after me will take care of it. That's not what governing is about. It's about problem solving. It's about trying to figure out how we continue to move this city forward based on the circumstances and the information that we have, and trying to get the best forecasting down. That's hard work, and being part of the solution. Because I will tell you, and I think this was sort of overlooked by some of the comments by my colleagues, but the city manager clearly stated and showed that expenses outside of pension, City of Phoenix is doing a very good job, and I don't think anyone could disagree. Now, we have to continue getting better. The private sector has to continue getting better. Government has to continue getting better. Now, when it comes to pensions, because I have been part of the solution, directly been part of the solution of our pension reform efforts internally with the COBRA system, which I believe the forecast there is we're going to save about $1 billion in about 20 or so years because of those changes. By the way, that's a solution that was not unanimously supported by this council. Because even then, when that was before this council, we had a couple of my colleagues vote no and say that we probably should have gone further, we should have done all the things that 124 is running into now, some of those things anyway. And the concern by the majority of this council supported it, said, if you go too far, we're listening to our attorney, if we go too far, we will not win in court. This is where we need to be. And the people of Phoenix agreed, supported it with a healthy margin, and because of it, the COBRA system is moving in the right direction. But as the city manager stated, and again, a point that I think is just overlooked and frankly ignored, when you're talking about a pension system, and when you're talking about someone who starts work at a certain time and will get their pension a couple of decades, 3-4 decades later, then it's not just one of those things that you can just fix overnight. And that's why the projection for the COBRA's changes will take about 23 years, because it means everyone who's being hired by the city of Phoenix now, and I guess going back for the last couple of years, is in that new system, and that's why it takes so long. That's the reality of it. That's governing. Now, we can ignore that and just say, yeah, but there's a problem, and you need to fix it, because the council before me didn't fix it, and you need to fix it. That's not realistic. Let's just go and take care of it at the legislature. This is the Phoenix City Council. I have the honor and the privilege to represent this city at the Arizona League of Cities and Towns. 91 cities and towns, 91 representatives sitting around that table. Many of the decisions made at the legislature impact our cities, every one of us, and towns. And pension is a big one. It's major. Prop 124 passed. Again, I was directly involved in that. And it was a great bipartisan effort. And we, frankly, ran into some issues. And that's what we're dealing with now. That's the reality of it. So it's about being a problem solver, and I want to thank everyone who is involved in Prop 124, even though we ran into some issues, because I would say everyone involved in 124 and try to move that ball forward, I would consider every one of them actual problem solvers, and not people who sit back and say, well, someone's got to fix it. Let me just be the person who points out the obvious every single time. The sky is falling. And I don't think our city needs to hear that. I think we're better than that. You know, let's take our police officers as an example and our firefighters. This is what it costs to hire a police officer or a firefighter. City manager said for every dollar in salary, 67 cents or 62 cents goes into pension costs. Well, what's the answer? Should we not hire police and firefighters in this city? And then, of course, the same members may criticize the city for not hiring police officers and firefighters. Or should we continue to make this city a safe city and then criticize management because pension costs are out of control? Or do we actually roll up our sleeves and perhaps vote yes on a reform that we know would help our city? Because that's a problem solver. You know, do we cut the public relations office? Should we just get rid of the public relations office? People are able to watch this meeting live stream. It's going to be on YouTube. People can pull this information up. It's called transparency. It's a big city. People should have information on what's happening in their city. I want to thank our public relations office because they are making it possible. So how much is transparency worth in this city? That's not a realistic approach. Let's just cut the public relations office. Public affairs, let's cut the public affairs office. And I don't expect you to have this in front of you, Jeff, because I don't think you have all the binders in front of you. But any idea of what, or how much money and grants our city typically gets each year? Overall, federal, state?
I don't, but it's hundreds of millions of dollars.
Hundreds, if I remember correctly, it is definitely in the triple-digit millions. Okay? Is that really the answer? Let's just do away with our government affairs office, the very office that is moving this city and attracting those federal grants and those grants at the legislature and with other partners. Is that really the answer? In fact, in our toughest years recently, I was not on the council, but as a lifelong Phoenician, I was certainly appreciative. We were able to hire police officers and firefighters based on grants. So is the answer let's just get rid of the public affairs office because we should all be doing the lobbying? What's stopping anyone on this council from going to the legislature now and getting before your representatives and the governor's office? I don't think anything stops this council from doing that. Now, the reality is we have a charter in place. It's a good charter. The majority of this council sets the direction. And so our government affairs office, well, they're responsible for going and taking that direction and moving to the legislature. Otherwise, you might have a council member on this council that will go down and lobby for things that indirectly go against what the direction of this city is set forth by the majority of the council. That's probably happened a couple times. That's the reality of it. This is transparency, this is government, and it's hard. And we have a challenge. We have a challenge, but, you know, I'm up for it, and I hope everyone else is. And it's going to take rolling up our sleeves and being problem solvers. And, of course, allowing the public to be involved, which is, you know, Ed, I think you mentioned in March, we're going to have another round of the budget hearing meetings, which is important. So that said, thank you for this update. What's not mentioned, I think it's a very important point, is our contingency funds, rainy day funds, are at a record high. So we're doing a good job. A lot of things have been cut. A lot of fat has been cut over the last several years, and you know, I don't know if cutting is the option any longer. I don't think anyone is a fan of something like the food tax. So we have to continue to figure this out and to be problem solvers and to move our city forward.
Thank you very much, Councilwoman. Councilwoman Pastor?
Yes. Thank you for all my colleagues and all their comments. I agree with many of them. My question is, we know that pension funds continue to rise every year, and every year. That's going to happen no matter what. So my question is more of, how are we going to be proactive and really building a sustainable budget? And not having to have these dialogues every year as to, okay, this year we're balanced, next year this is the deficit, this is deficit. Because then what happens with me in all reality, are we really balanced or are we cutting? Because I received a memo or read a memo where departments were supposed to look at their budgets and 10% had to be cut. Today, I'm listening today and it's now saying 5%. So it's very fluid in this whole process of a budget. And what is it in reality? Is it 10%? Is it 5%? And then next thing we know, it's going to be, well, it's 0%. And then the following year, we're in a deficit. So I think we really have to look at how we deliver our budget and the way we look at it and be able to sustain it. The other piece is that I heard we are hiring police officers and firefighters, which I think we should, and it's part of our budget. But are we actually really, in all reality, hiring our police officers as fast as we can and getting them on there as quickly as we can? What have we really done in recruitment? Are we staying in state? Are we going out of state? Are we really, really aggressively hiring and getting people into the pool and police and getting them in the ground? These are not part of the budget, but this is all comes around about part of the budget. And to hear that it is a statewide issue, none of us disagree that it's not a statewide issue. But what are we doing to gather our cities together and bringing a collective voice together to say we have to do something at the state? And how do we go about doing that? And who do we need at the table to talk about it? And what is the dynamic of it? But until we start moving forward, we're just going to stay in the same position that we're in, and it's just going to be this, let's block here, let's block there. We need to go on the offense. And we really need to really look at what are we doing and how do we get there? Because I don't want to be sitting here next year and say, okay, this is where we're at and we haven't done this. I want to get to where we're healthy, we're growing, and we have done these proactive moves in order to help us for our budget and for the citizens of Phoenix, really. And we knew that pension reform wasn't going to kick in until 20 years. We knew we had to do it now in order for us to see the fruit of our labor in many years to come. And so this is the hard dialogue we have to have. This is a hard dialogue we're going to have with our community and really say, what are the essentials for our city in order to survive? So those are my comments.
Thank you very much. Councilwoman, Councilman Cecil, please.
Just as a follow-up and just a response to Councilman Valenzuela's comments there, I'm not sure what part of strategic plan and prioritization of functions I didn't get through, but it's really an easy plan to do. And people do this on a day-to-day basis. They do it in their businesses. This is what a business owner does. They sit down and say, what are the most strategic functions? So instead of spending $5 million a year in public relations, they may spend $600,000 or $635,000, whatever that number is. But until you do that, you're going to constantly go through this process. It is a simple process to do, but the only reason we don't do it as a city is because it makes you have to make tough decisions. I'm okay with that. If you want to do that, that's great. If it fits in line with what it is we should be doing, great, let's do it. Right now, the system we have is everybody throws all their stuff in because no one knows what is and what isn't a strategic function. Everyone throws in, hey, I've got to fund this project or I've got to do that. If you put in line a specific plan in place, it's so much easier to do. One, the food tax, any type of revenue-based anymore, especially when we've got the most revenues we've ever had in the history of the city of Phoenix, starts going back into the revenue-based model. It does not work. It won't work. It's failed everywhere across the world. It's failed in other businesses. It does not work. You have to base everything on outcomes-based. The comments about some of the council members running down and running bills, I'm the one that does that. If I can't fix it here at the City of Phoenix, I go down to the state legislature and I try to get them to pass bills to fix things like bills dealing with labor harmony, Project Harmony, the consolidated elections I helped write, the ballot harvesting, which protects the public, and the courts have agreed that that is a totally legal thing to stop doing here at the state of Arizona, where people pick up other people's ballots, turn them in by the thousands. You have non-election trained individuals picking up other people's ballots by the thousands. Who knows if they're losing those ballots? It's insane. Arizona, I think, was one of the first states. I helped write that bill. The only bill that I lost, I think, in the last 4 years, and I think I've get them through at least 3 a year. I've got a good one coming this year. You'll be reading about it real soon. And it'll be very controversial, but it's going to help fix governments across the state of Arizona and how we use funds and make sure it's taxpayer protected first. You protect the citizens first. But when you look at Senate Bill 1322, got it through the House and the Senate, and the ex-governor vetoed it. So we were one vote away from creating one of the most revolutionary models in the country. Arizona would have been the model of the entire country when it came down to how we govern and how we use taxpayers' monies and how we focus on the taxpayer first. So again, we should be focused on police officers since we're short on them. That is a primary function. Doesn't mean you can't do other things, but right now it's a mishmash. We all throw our projects in, we all think this should be funded or that should be funded, but until we know a clear guideline collectively, and I'm willing to work with everyone here, and I would hope everyone would be willing to do too, but you gotta rank order from the most important function to the least important function, and then what you do is you start focusing your efforts on those ones at the very bottom of things that you can move out of the system. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councilman DeCiccio. Any other final comments on this? This is, again, today was just a budget status update to prepare this council and the public. We will be having, as we always do, a significant number of public budget hearings. The reason why our city manager asked for the 5% proposals from our various staff is that it maximizes the options that the public and this council have to look from. In addition, a few years ago, this council required staff to adopt a zero-based budget. It's a significant piece of work that has to come out every single year, in which every single program that each department implements is listed on a line item basis, I think from all sources of revenue as well, not just city revenue, but federal dollars as well. So those council members that have particular recommendations on functions they think that the city should no longer utilize, the public budget process is the best way to make that recommendation. Obviously, we will vote upon that here before this city council, but the zero-based budget is very, very helpful so that people can see each and every program, not just the department-wide budget, but each and every program and the funding source for that program to help accomplish some of the things that were addressed here today. All right, with that, we're going to move on to item number 3 on today's agenda. Item number 3 concerns a proposal for a developer reimbursement agreement for 15815 South 50th Street. This is a request for reimbursement for drainage infrastructure at that location that I just mentioned. Councilman DeCiccio asked originally this be on the December agenda. I think for family reasons, he was not able to have that on that agenda, and it requested that we move it to this agenda based upon an email that I received from Councilman DeCiccio. So we put it on today's agenda. Councilman DeCiccio indicated he was supportive of a payback model that reimbursed this developer, IPA, for the work on drainage infrastructure because of a belief that that infrastructure was regional infrastructure. It's my understanding, although we're going to hear from our professional staff here today, that our professional staff believes that the drainage infrastructure undertaken by the developer was the responsibility of the property owner and is not supportive of a reimbursement model. In the interest of fairness, here's my recommended order of events for this item. I'll ask that staff have 15 minutes to make their presentation on why they are not recommending reimbursement to this developer for the drainage infrastructure. And then no questions during that time. Then we'll have a representative of the property owner also have equal amount of time, 15 minutes, to make their case, respond to any arguments made by our professional staff. Again, no questions during their presentation. Then I'll take a couple cards here from the public, take cards from the public, and then I'll hand it over to our members of the council to ask any questions or provide comments or to have a discussion. Once that is complete, I will then entertain a motion on this item because it is set for action here today. And if anyone disagrees?
Oh, if I could just give an explanation why I brought it forward too, Mayor.
Please.
And I think you did a good job on that. I appreciate it. Just to show you a couple pictures, Chandler Boulevard's been flooding for several years now. It's been going on for quite a few years, and that's a public street. So the question is, I think the main question is whether or not it's regional or whether it's not, if it's a regional issue, it's almost illegal to require, well, it is illegal to require a property owner to take care of other people's problems. It's a Nolan Dolan set forth in the Supreme Court rulings back in the 1990s. So, but if it's not a regional issue, I know there's some conflict here. I didn't know that until recently. I always believed that it was a regional issue. If it's not a regional issue, it's also illegal to give a developer monies. You don't do that unless they're solving a regional problem, because then you have the gift clause on the other end of it. So I know there's some significant issues here. Back in 2015 is when we started working on this. I mean, everything was heading in that direction. So I'll let them give their presentation and all. But I want to know what led up to this. And Mario, you and I have had this conversation. Said, hey, if this is not a regional problem, we should not be funding this. Now, whether it is or it isn't, I don't know. Because now I'm hearing that it's not a regional issue. And then if it's not, I'm not going to support it. If it is a regional issue, I'm going to support it because it's not fair to tie up one person and to encumber their private property rights. It's illegal to do that. You cannot force someone to take care of other people's problems. So that's what brought this up, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilman DeCiccio. My impression from having been briefed by staff, but they'll have a chance to speak for themselves, is that their non-support for reimbursement is not necessarily based on whether it's regional or not regional. There may be other important policy considerations as well. On the issue of Nolan Dolan, I don't want our city attorney to give legal advice here in public, so I'll let him appropriately deal with it, but I assume he would not be allowing this item to be heard, or we certainly recommend we not hear this item if he thought there were a Nolan Dolan issue. Mr. Allen, I don't know if you want to address that first, then I'll hand it over to our city manager.
You're right, Mayor. We wouldn't want to address the Nolan Dolan issue in public session, number one. And number two, I don't think that there's a Nolan Dolan issue that precludes us from going forward now and discussing it on the merits of the facts and that issue and the policy issue that's before the council.
Thank you so very much. Mr. City Manager, I'll hand it to you, and then we'll start the clock 15 minutes for each side.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. We have staff here. Mario Paniagua, the Deputy City Manager, is going to talk about, as you mentioned, staff does not recommend reimbursement in this case for several reasons, policy and precedent among them. And he is joined by Deputy City Manager Paul Blue, Chris Mackey of the Economic Development Department. Alan Stevenson is going to make a more detailed presentation about the grading and drainage issue, and Ray Dovalina from Streets. So I'll turn it over to Mario to preserve time.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. As you mentioned, Mayor, Investment Property Associates, IPA, is requesting reimbursement of $1.175 million from the city for a constructed drainage project at the site you mentioned near 50th Street and Chandler. The drainage project was built to address the city's stormwater requirements for the property, which staff has determined to be the responsibility of the developer. The stormwater flow and requirement is based on a 1998 study conducted by the City of Phoenix along with the Flood Control District of Maricopa County. It complies with the city code, which essentially requires that developments must address their historical stormwater flows across their properties as they develop. Developers of other sites to the north and to the west of this site have addressed similar drainage requirements, which will be discussed in more detail here shortly, as those properties developed without the use of city funds. IPA approached city staff to request the city fund the project. Initially, when the meeting was held, staff explained that no funding was available from the city for this project. IPA then asked about the use of a possible development agreement using construction and rental sales tax generated by that development. IPA has repeatedly confirmed that staff in the Planning and Development, Street Transportation, and Community and Economic Development departments were very helpful, providing information, answering questions, and giving details about the city's methodology for entering into a development agreement. At IPA's request, staff provided a template and comments on a draft letter of intent to be responsive to IPA's inquiries. At IPA's request and upon their payment to the city, a public bid process was conducted on the project, not because the city required it or not because the city even requested it, but it was done because IPA intended to pursue a development agreement further and wanted to ensure that the project could potentially be eligible for city funding at a future date. But even though staff was very helpful, very responsive, and representatives of IPA have confirmed this several times, including as recently as last Friday, staff has never committed to, promised, or agreed to recommend a development agreement for this project to the City Council. A development agreement was not and still not recommended by city staff for city funding of this development project. It does not meet the typical criteria that would apply to city funding of a project that is determined to be a developer cost. Although it's expected to be a fantastic project serving a market demand in the Ahwatukee area, it does not result in significant ongoing city revenue or savings, does not create a significant number of jobs, and was not negotiated or approved prior to construction per the city's practice. Staff is not aware of any development agreements entered into with the city that were negotiated after project construction. Alan Stevenson from the Planning and Development Department is here and will guide you through some more information with some visuals on the slides about stormwater flows and comparable developments. Alan?
Thank you, Mario, Mayor, members of the council. I want to kind of walk us through some slides here to show how stormwater flow patterns have been addressed by developments within this particular area. As Mr. Paniagua discussed, back in 1998, there was a study that was funded by the city and Maricopa County Flood Control District that identified some stormwater alternatives in this area. At that time, and for a little bit before that, there was discussions with property owners about forming an improvement district that the property owners declined to do at that time, and the city has used that policy and that study to require development as it comes in to address those issues, along with improvements that the city has made that we'll talk about to handle some of those drainage things as well. This particular map here shows the blue lines are a couple of drainage channels that we'll talk about here in detail. The red area is the overall subject site by IPA. They purchased this property in 2011. The first phase that was developed was a 402-unit apartment project, which takes up the bulk of the site, about 33 acres here. There's about 7 acres, which is the Ahwatukee Generations site, which is the current site that they're looking at for an assisted living facility. And then there's a small portion up here, about 3 acres, that's reserved for a future specialty hospital. As part of this first phase of development, they recorded a temporary drainage easement over this portion of the site to delay addressing these drainage issues until they could work on it some more as part of this next phase, which is what they've done here today. Chapter 32 of the City Code, along with the Stormwater Policies and Standards Manual, address all the drainage requirements for the city. So as part of that, each development is required to address their off-site flows that flow into the property and deal with them and convey them through their property, just like a river or anything else comes through. You've got to take what comes to your property and convey it through your property off into a manner that's similar to the area that it left your property in the past. You also have to deal with your on-site flows, which is rainfall that falls on your property and proximate to that as well. And so as part of this overall effort, I want to first start off with this area in the upper corner right up here. This is a project called Thistle Landing that was constructed in 1997. And you see as part of this project, we're going to zoom in here with this next aerial. They developed it so that there is a low-flow stormwater channel that is underground that flows through the middle of the site where this blue line is. They also recorded a 185-foot wide drainage easement through this project, which is really this whole area here, and put parking over that gets periodically inundated during larger storm events, but that conveys the water through their site, ultimately to a retention basin here that we'll see some pictures of in just a minute. Here's a picture of the site looking through it. So you see this is their low flow underground. There's a pipe that handles low flow, but you can see how the land is contoured, and this is actual drainage easement where they do these improvements that they're allowed to do and have water run across the top of this during the larger storm events. This next phase picture here, you see this is the tail end of their property, and this is a large retention basin here, which retains the water for their on-site requirements, as well as retains water that would flow through the site. Once it overtops, it goes into these 3 box culverts here, which were 4-foot by 8-foot box culverts that the developer put in, along with all these other improvements at their cost at the time of development. That was part of their development requirements. Through those box culverts, it gets conveyed to the next property, which is the El Dorado Foothills Gateway project. That's what you see right here in this red outlined here. Zooming in on this project, this one, it was a 306-unit apartment project, along with some retail uses and a hotel. This particular project chose to handle their drainage in a slightly different manner, and they proposed to route it around the property. So you see this blue line that just showed up, and they constructed it and had to go around their property instead of through the middle like the last development had. And so as part of this particular effort, they constructed this concrete channel that you see here going around their project. It's about a 1,600-foot long channel to go around their project. It's 25 feet by 5 feet deep, and they dedicated the drainage easements that go all the way around that. To get to the tail end of their project, which shows up in this little red, I want to focus in on that because that's where there's a drainage basin area today. And so this was done and constructed at the time of that project. And so as part of that, they constructed about 3.78 acres of permanent retention along with that drainage channel. And they also recorded a 1.5 acre temporary retention easement to retain all of this water here pending completion of the rest of the system to convey this water to an ADOT channel that we'll talk about here in just a minute. All of these improvements were done at the cost of the developer. The city did not participate in those costs. This is a picture of that inside the drainage basin area, looking at the street here. And so you see this next one, this is about, you're down in this area here. This picture's taken looking this way. So you see Here's the box culverts that the city put in, paid for to be put in as part of an ADOT improvement to the Chandler Boulevard project. So the city provided money to ADOT, who put in the pipes that convey the water across Chandler Boulevard, where the public has the public right-of-way, to the private property here on the subject site. Again, here's the larger area for their site. And so zooming into how they dealt with it, they put in 2 underground pipes that run the length of their property here. We'll see some pictures of what those look like in just a minute here. So you see this is a picture on Chandler Boulevard. They've already constructed, put in the improvements. This is a picture of the head wall right here and the maintenance grate so that somebody can get in there and maintain the area where it goes from the underground pipes that were put in by this ADOT into their private property. This is the portion of it under construction on their site. So you see the 2 large 84-inch pipes that they put in as part of their particular project right here. They did this as underground on top of this area. They have parking spaces and a dog walk that they use for the proposed residents when they live there in the future after completion of the project. So that takes you around to this ADOT channel on this particular site here, where, jumping back down to their corner, those pipes dump into an ADOT channel that ADOT constructed that goes along here, and then ultimately goes down and goes underneath the Pecos Road into the Pecos Basin. I want to hop back up to the top part here, where this is another channel of how flow was dealt with in development by this area. So this is the Desert Breeze subdivision that's in that area there. They constructed a drainage easement and a concrete channel along their portion of 48th Street to handle those off-site flows as they pass through their property and deal with some of their on-site flows as well. This is the next parcel that's directly south of there. It was a Tosco development that came in as part of a Circle K originally. However, now it is an M&I Bank building, and so you see a blow-up of that area, and you see that they continued on that channel. They have a little bit more natural looking as opposed to the concrete one going through here, but they constructed as part of their costs, built these 3 box culverts that their driveway goes over so that the water can continue flowing through their property and then ultimately crosses Chandler Boulevard. As part of this particular project, the private developer paid for all these improvements. They also extended the culvert underground approximately 100 feet across Chandler Boulevard. The city did enter into a development agreement, paid for a small portion of costs associated with that, but it was principally done by the developers on the north side of Chandler Boulevard and the south side, that then they put in those improvements to convey that same regional stormwater through this area. So you see this is the next area that's south of Chandler Boulevard, and you see the blue line continuing on here where it conveys through. This is a blow-up of that. They also chose an underground option to deal with their retention, so the water flows on the edge of their property right along down here in 2 underground channels that goes all the way through the length of their project, about 1,200 feet. They constructed 2 60-inch pipes that went through this whole 1,200-foot length. That was at their own cost. The city did not participate in that. Here's where that water comes back up above ground, just south of their site, into a concrete channel that has a retention or a drainage easement on it as well. And this same format continued along with that concrete channel, kind of going down here until it connects with this channel and then goes south underneath the 202 into that Pecos Basin. This is just an aerial that we'll leave up here for any future questions if we have those once we get to that point as outlined by the mayor. Thank you.
Mayor? Is there anyone else from staff as part of the presentation? I don't know how much time. 13 minutes, so okay. All right, good. All right, well, Councilman, first I think I'm going to have the representative of the developer have the opportunity to speak, and then public, and then we'll turn it over to yourself and other members of the council on questions on either for our professional staff or representatives of the developer. All right, so Mr. Bull, I assume you'll be the one representing the developer seeking the reimbursement. Please come over to the podium to my right, your left. Again, you'll have the same 15 minutes to address either issues they brought up or any other separate issues you'd like to present before this council. Mr. Bull.
Could
come up, please. Thank you. Mayor, members of the City Council, Ed Bowl, 702 East Osborne. Representing IPA, Bill Fettis, who's one of the principals at IPA, is here with me today. Also, two of our engineers, Lynn Airy, who's really a hydrologist and a water expert, is here, and I want Lynn, with your permission, to be able to address some comments concerning regional stormwater. Dave Solstick, who's also an engineer on behalf of IPA, is here and can help answer questions. I've represented IPA on a number of zoning-related matters. This is the first reimbursement kind of thing I've ever represented them on, and Bill Fettis tells me that's in part because IPA has never requested a development agreement or reimbursements on anything ever until now. And the reason that they're requesting is because, again, this aerial showing the IPA, north is up, you see I-10 Chandler Boulevard going east and west. IPA's properties are south and west of the hotel at the southwest corner of I-10 and Chandler Boulevard. This is a blow-up of it. The green highlighted property is Gen 2, which is a senior housing facility that is substantially under construction, that IPA had to make a decision as to whether to hold off on constructing that $42 million development while we worked through some issues, or proceeding, expecting to get or anticipating getting reimbursed. Putting the pipes in the ground had to be one of the first things they did on that site. This is a map of the historic flows in the area. As you'll see, most flows went away, did not come on to this site. This aerial with the red outlines what we've always referred to, not only verbally, but in our city-approved drainage report. The red outlines the 1,670-acre regional area that, in a man-made configuration, gets trapped at the southwest quadrant of the interchange and has only one place to go, and that's onto IPA's property. I want Lynn Airy in a minute to come up and explain why this is regional and how the facilities running along I-10 and the basin further to the south is regional, and getting the water onto IPA's site is a part of that regional analysis. As we look at this situation, the blue outlines the regional drainage corridor that brings water down from the north, concentrates it at this northwest quadrant. The red arrows coming onto IPA's property. The yellowish green identifies an easement that was provided by El Dorado on their plat on what they'd understood, what at least is indicated to someday could develop if the water ever got out of there, so they anticipated it'd be a temporary easement, because this is what happens until IPA stepped up to improve this situation, which we always perceive to be a public health safety issue that occurs at that interchange. This is our approved drainage study. This is where in that drainage study, Lynn Airy and his staff intentionally referred to regional hydrology, and later where they intentionally referred to local hydrology. The local solution cost IPA about $230,000. We're not asking for a nickel of reimbursements on that $230,000. But on the regional, we are requesting help, where the goal has always been to seek fairness on what is it that would be fair to share in the cost of this regional infrastructure that's needed to deal with this regional problem that in a man-made configuration gets trapped and then unloaded onto IPA's property. When we began the discussions, we were told there wasn't city funds to solve the problem that existed there, but if IPA could help find a way to fund it, then with no guarantees we would get reimbursed, but that we were to work with staff on getting things set up for reimbursement, including public bidding and so on and so forth, which we did and did diligently. But this unique situation, if we go back to this exhibit, which we believe makes us unique, is that IPA is the one property, even though those north of us provided drainage improvements, so have we, but this is the one property that is trapped under the plug at the bottom end of a man-made bathtub which stores water from 1,670 acres, which I want Len to talk more about for a minute, if you'll allow it. But if that isn't regional, we don't know what is, and our engineers don't know what is, and we did everything as we could through our report and otherwise to identify it as regional every step of the way. Len, you want to come up? Mayor, is it okay if Len Airy speaks?
Yes.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. We did this study on this, and the tributary, as you can see, extends up into the South Mountain area. At the end of the lower end of the whole system, there's a regional detention basin that takes the water that comes out of that, puts it through a basin and meters it out into the Indian community to the south. As part of that basin, there was a channel that was built up along the ADOT right-of-way that comes up to our property. It's designed to handle the whole flow. And the city and ADOT built a culvert underneath the freeway off-ramp that also is part of the regional system. The missing piece between the culvert that ADOT and the city built and the ADOT channel is on the property, and there needs to be a connection between those. Could have, right now, water, as we mentioned, comes across the road. If we had continued that pattern, I don't think we would have ever been approved by the city.
Thank you, Len.
Thank you.
Again, the red arrow identifies generally IPA's property. We are at the bottom of this man-made bathtub that was created for good reason, but it wasn't created by IPA, and we don't put 1 teaspoonful of water in that basin on the north side of Chandler Boulevard. I also want to point out that, to the best of my knowledge, not only did our drainage report that was approved identify regional and local, and that's what we've always talked about, to the best of my knowledge, until we got staff's report and had some additional discussion with collective staff last Friday morning, we'd never heard that there was an issue over whether this is regional or not. Maybe we're not good listeners, but it seemed perfectly obvious. Our engineers were telling us regional at 1,670 acres, all trapped to come through one drain onto our property. This is a solution that was derived. It's not the only solution that was studied, but these are two 84-inch tall cast-in-place concrete pipes. They're big, obviously. Man standing up in them, standing at the other part of it, big trash rack on the north side. This is a regional scenario. These pipes are located in that blue area, which is shown on this exhibit, picking up the water through the box culverts, taking it over to the regional channel that Len was talking about that runs parallel to I-10. The yellowish green identifies the local drainage being moved across IPA's site, and again, we're not asking for a nickel to move that local drainage water. The blue is provided in easements that were dedicated for free from the city, from IPA to the city for purposes of drainage. We always understood that's what we needed to do. They are public easements to the city. They were acted on, I know you can't read that, but they were acted on the city council before they were recorded. This is an example of a couple alternatives that were studied. These alternatives are only 2 of many that were studied, but on the left is using an open channel configuration, and we put this here because one of the things in staff's report is maybe this could be done for a different amount, maybe 400,000. We talked some with staff about that not being an engineered estimate. This estimate on the left, which I know you can't read, indicates that the subcontractor's cost, coupled with engineering and relocating utilities, which is common to both of these examples, is about $1.1 million. Construction cost only on this is about $763. It's an open channel that's riprap lined to move the water and keep it contained. The right is the alternative that was chosen. It's the 2 cast-in-place 84-inch pipes. That's the $1.17 million, inclusive of construction, engineering, relocating utilities, and so on. IPA is open to talking with anyone about any solution and always has been on this, but candidly, this scenario showing where these pipes go, it wraps around a hotel and is adjacent to a first-class, well under construction senior housing facility. This is an example of the things that we understood we were to do, which was to public bid. Once we had the plans approved, and staff was incredibly helpful in working through how to get the plans designed and approved and the drainage report approved. This is at public bid. They proceeded through the city's monitored public bidding processes, selected the low public bidder. As we moved forward, again, consistent with us understanding things were regional and we were anticipating understanding we were on the right track for reimbursement. This is the first of 3 draft LOIs were exchanged. This one came from the city. It talks about reimbursements. Needed more information plugged into it because we didn't have public bid numbers back. This is one that we then provided back to the city, putting additional detail in it about public bid numbers and what's all included in the scope. This one is that one I just showed you was from me. This is one a week or so later that made some additional fine tuning. No letter of intent was ever signed. I'm not trying to suggest it was, but we were working through those processes. This is one of, as we can run through these, there's just a series of emails and other kinds of information leading up to the city's calculation of potential sales or sales tax revenues and leasing revenues generated on these properties, because again, IPA always understood from the get-go that any reimbursement would come only from economic development that had been created by IPA. This first alternative shows 6 sites. We then had discussions with some additional staff who said they didn't think it was right to look from IPA properties anywhere in the city of Phoenix other than at 50th Street and Chandler Boulevard. This was narrowed down then to the 2 sites and handled just in that manner. This again is the Eldorado Plat on the north side of Chandler Boulevard. Now, in the context of all of that, how did we get here? I can tell you that we got here because we were stuck. You know, what do? We're a private landowner on the unique downstream end of a big man-made bathtub with one drain, and that drain was coming onto our property. We went to the councilman whose district we're in to discuss possibilities. We had a good, healthy, we believe, discussion, and then moved forward with staff on alternatives and how to get it public bid and exchanging ideas through LOIs and exchanging a number of calls and emails and so on and so forth. We always perceive this as a regional problem. We always recognize that the city code calls for handling stormwater, but I don't read the code, right or wrong, to require that a downstream developer accept for free all stormwater, no matter how much and no matter what its source. We're not talking about a natural concentration of stormwater here. We're talking about a concentration that's occurred through various public improvements that are now putting it on our property. IPA decided to step up and help solve that problem in the interest of not just IPA, but of the public and health safety kinds of issues as well, at a time where the city wasn't in a budget position to write a check to do it, to make those improvements. Mayor, and members of the council, we don't agree with a 400,000 estimate. We've got a detailed estimate. We don't agree, we hope that fairness can be achieved today, or if not today, through a continuance and further discussion. But at the end of the day, fairness, whether it's just pure fairness or talking about rough proportionality, we simply do not believe it's fair or equitable to have this private property owner assume the full tab for 1,100 CFS of water coming onto IPA's property, because that's the place that was decided by governmental agencies to put box culverts. We can talk about uniqueness, and I may not be aware of some, but I'm not personally aware of governmental agencies putting in box culverts and then plugging them up. They're there. IPA stepped up, not only built the pipes, but unplugged them, even in the face of monsoons last summer. I hope that fairness can be achieved, and I hope that the efforts that IPA made in good faith are recognized by this council in reimbursing them solely from revenues that are generated on IPA's properties, which, but for IPA's development, wouldn't generate one nickel of revenues to the city. With that, Mayor, if you have questions of Bill Fettis or Lynn Airy or Dave Solstick or me, we'll do our best to answer them. But whether today or at a future date after additional discussion, we hope fairness can be achieved.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bull. I'm sure there will be questions. I did indicate at the beginning that I would give our professional staff 15 minutes, yourself 15 minutes as well. Then I would go to cards and then turn it over to members of the council for questions for either yourself, your team, or our professional staff. Mr. Jim Kenny from El Dorado Holdings, you wish to provide testimony for this council up to 2 minutes. Good to see you. Thanks for your patience.
My pleasure. Thank you, Mayor and members of council. I'll be brief. We don't, our property, what we still have is to the north of this side, on the north side of Chandler. So I just really wanted to share a little bit of historical perspective. It's always important for us to have good relations with the city, and we do, I believe. It feels like it was closer to 20 years ago that we set aside this temporary retention easement, and now, we're grateful to IPA for having done the work. We finally have the chance to develop it. We sat very patiently for that to happen. From our own perspective, this always was a regional thing, but be that as it may, I'm not an expert either, but when I look at where the historical flows were and how they've been intercepted by Interstate 10 and other things, clearly it's a concentration to me, and I support the idea that it's regional. So, it seems for us, we always expected it was going to be a temporary easement that would be solved by the city or others within a couple of years. Well, here we are the better part of 15 or 20 years later, and finally, we get the chance to do something. We've been very patient with it, and we look forward now to having the chance to finally move forward with it. So, again, I would just adopt what Mr. Bull said in terms of the fairness, the equities of it. When you look at the overtopping and everything else, that's not a local issue. That's a regional issue of water coming over that road, and we'd appreciate any consideration that the council could give to IPA's request, or at least for the continuance that Mr. Bull mentioned, so there could be greater effort placed in working something out. That's all I have.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Kenny. I appreciate that very much. As I mentioned earlier, then now I'll turn it to members of this council, and I know that I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions and/or comments. But Mr. Manager, I wanted you a chance just to really, you heard obviously the thorough presentation from Mr. Bull. From your perspective, you're the city manager of this city. You are not recommending reimbursement of this project. It seems that there's a lot of discussion of regional, not regional on this project. But I wanted you an opportunity to explain from your perspective as city manager, sure, for that and or any other reason why you are not recommending reimbursement.
Thank you, Mayor. There's several things here, and Alan can talk more specifically about the details, but I don't think that the regional, non-regional conversation particularly applies. We have a city code that requires people to address water. Every property owner can say that they don't contribute 1 teaspoon to what comes from upstream, but we have to address it. We have to the property owner has to deal with it. The city does not do these things. We do not do development agreements in arrears. None of the property owners north of and west of this project had city participation in there. And the precedent of going after the fact and doing this is worrisome to me, because we have properties all over the city that deal with stormwater that comes to them and goes from them. So the policy, the precedent of that, there's question about how much money, is it 400,000 or more? I would say that's really not particularly relevant to our recommendation, is how much it costs. It is whether it is the responsibility of the city to pay someone to take care of their private property in that way, and our recommendation is it is not.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll now turn it over to members of the council. Councilman Stark, do you have a question? Councilman DeCisa, do you have comments or questions, please?
Yeah, I've been working on this water issue since the 1990s. There was significant flooding. This is the last piece of it, too. Just a question to Brad, if I could, just a general question. Can any governmental entity force or require any property owner to take care of a problem not his own?
Well, the way you ask that question is...
Generally.
I would say generally no, but I don't see this problem that way.
I get that, and that's appreciative, because that's a Nolan issue. And whether or not there's total disagreement as to whether or not it is their problem or not. Here's the problem that I've got, okay, is that you guys have led me down a path. Ed, you and your team did this. I would never have supported this if it was not a regional issue. This is the first I've heard of this. We started in 2015 having conversations with staff. Never once did they say, we're not going to do this. Never once. You had letters of intent going back and forth. Like, I'm not going to support this today. There's no way in hell I would support a case like this with city staff saying that it is not a regional issue. You guys knew this from day one. Not one time did you come to me or anybody and say, Sal, we're not going to do this. You never told that to the developer. You never told that to anybody until the final report came out. And it was strong and hard. Well, you had every opportunity to kill this thing from day one with me. I sat down in 2015 trying to solve this water issue for the Ahwatukee area since 2015 because of the major flooding that occurred on Chandler Boulevard. 2015. You got documents upon documents going back and forth with city staff, where even city staff in 2015, and I think you guys have seen these, they call this a regional issue, a regional problem. You guys did this, okay? 2016, I'm not going to throw anyone in particular under the bus because I don't like doing that kind of stuff, but you got documents from 2016 saying we're eager to include the reimbursement for this regional infrastructure. That matters, okay? It matters. You cannot set the city staff, cannot set the council up like this and set us down a path and then all of a sudden say, oops, we were wrong on that. It's okay to do that at some point in there, but for 2 full years, you've had city staff, everybody up there at one point or another was copied on all this information. At not one time, while the letters of intent were going back and forth, did anyone say, not once, and Ed, I thought you might have brought some of this up because, well, you didn't have to. Let me do it. But at the end of the day, you guys had an obligation to stop this thing. I put 2 years working into this. I'm not going to support this case today. I just want you to know that, based on the city report, it not being regional. I would never support that. But I've got to tell you, you've led everyone down a path. You've thrown everybody under the bus, is what you've done by doing this today. And you should have stopped it. You could have stopped it and said, hey, this ain't going to work. Now, Mark, you and I had a conversation maybe 4 or 5 months ago is when you guys started having doubts about it because they were done with the project at that point. Once they finished the project, the answer was no. But, okay, but what stopped it from moving that way? Why didn't, from day one, from 2015, when we're calling it a regional problem, did that not happen? Why? It's nice to be strong today, Ed, okay, but you weren't then. when you've seen these documents since then. So why not stop it then? You make everyone, well, you make me in particular look like a fool up here supporting a case that you never would have, if you weren't going to support it, just say no. Come in with the explanation. There's no way I would ever support a reimbursement for somebody. Never. If it was just for an individual private property owner. If it's a regional problem, it's a regional issue that requires a regional solution. But I vote against those kinds of things when it's individually based. On regional based, I vote for those things. You could have done that, but 2 years down the road? I mean, really, why? What happened? From 2015, emails calling it a regional problem. What happened? What changed the position? I'm okay with that. Just tell me. I'm all right with that. And I don't like doing this in a public meeting. I really don't, but I'm embarrassed by it. Because I came out and put my neck on the line. I sent a letter to the mayor. He said, hey, the mayor requested the letter. He said, I won't put this on the agenda unless you send me a letter saying you're going to vote for it, which I don't do, or that you're going to support it. I'm not going to do it that way. I don't do that. I mean, it looks like a setup is what it does. But it's a regional issue. So what changed from the time I sent that letter to all of a sudden it became now it wasn't? What happened?
All right, I'll let the city manager have an opportunity to address that, but as you know, this agenda, the policy agenda, is set by me. It was not my intent to put this on there until you had requested it.
No, but you said specifically, I want to know that that you're going to vote for this. You said that. And I'm like, okay, that's kind of a weird request. No one asked for that. I mean, you could have sent a letter that said, Sal, I want you to put this on there, but you didn't. You said, I want to know specifically he's going to vote for this, and that there was another request in there. I can't remember, but you wanted to know specifically if I was going to vote for it. And so
Councilman, you well know that if staff supports a particular proposal, they'll put it on the formal agenda. This agenda is set by me. If staff were supporting this, we would have gone a different route.
You chose the policy, Mayor, not me. I would love to have gone to a formal agenda on this.
Well, but staff,
I didn't choose policy.
Our city manager the point I'm making is the city manager only would have put that on a formal agenda if city management was supportive of reimbursing this developer, or with signatures of 4 council members having to put it on there. Your request that we have it on this agenda was obviously indicative of the fact that staff wasn't supporting this. You obviously did, which is fine. But out of respect for you, we did put it on today's agenda so we can have a full hearing. That's exactly what we had. But to suggest that you're surprised by staff's non-support, I think is not accurate.
It is. Well, how do you know that? Of course it is accurate, 100% accurate, Mayor, because this was supposed to be scheduled, I believe, for a formal. Was it not, Ed, or not?
Never.
No? Okay, I don't know that. This is the first I've heard that as well. And the other part of it deals with, I was told that the only way this is going to be heard was to bring it to you, Mayor, as a policy issue, and that you required me to write a letter saying I was going to vote for it. Okay, I told you I was going to support it as long as it was regionally based, because that was the critical component for me to support this case. That was it. That's what I was told to do, and I did that. And I appreciate you putting it on the agenda.
Thank you.
But I've never had anyone ask me to have all these steps I had to put in it to basically hang myself on, is what I think you were trying to get me to do, which I'm fine with. I mean, that's the way politics is. But I'm really upset with staff in particular for dragging this through and just to the very end. You could have stopped at any point. I would have pulled the support on that thing. If you would have said, hey, this is not a regional problem early on, I would have done that. I would turn to them and say, hey, don't do it. You're picking up someone else's problem. But I am upset about that. But look, if you go through all these documents, you got city staff writing them back, calling it a regional problem. This is it. That's
right.
what I'm upset about.
Mr. Manager, I want the opportunity to respond to the councilman's questions.
Sure. Well, I'm strong now because this is the point at which I understand what's happening. I think that staff worked with developers, as they do with developers, to understand issues and be responsive to requests from the developer and also from the council member. At the point, staff never committed and never recommended it. At the point at which they fully understood what the request was, they said they don't recommend it. As to how strong the regional component of it was or not, I don't know, but this is not something that staff has recommended, although we did work with the developer for their questions to help them understand and get answers to their questions. If that's upsetting to council members, I'm sorry for that.
Mayor, I'm going to read this.
Please.
From city staff. Right now, it appears we may be able to do most, if not all, with the 50% construction sales tax on the new project. This is our best option. Okay, that's documentation that goes back and forth. So I'm just trying to tell you, you guys are the ones that set this in place and basically hung people like myself out there when you didn't need to. You know, we're trying to finish the reimbursement agreement. I mean, just document after document where it talks about where city staff was all supportive of moving forward with it. At any point, you could have said no. I mean, show me the first place. Show me any documentation before they completed the project, any documentation that says we're not going to do this. Show me anything. One document. Just show me one if you could. I mean, not today, you're not going to have it with you, but show me one where you said you didn't want to do that before it got to until they finished the project.
Mr. City Manager, I want a chance to respond to the councilman's questions.
I don't have all the documents. I haven't seen all the documents, but if we don't recommend, a development agreement needs to be in place before someone thinks they're going to get that, and then the council needs to approve it. That never happened here. Staff never recommended it. Council never approved it. The developer chose to go forward because it is not something that we do development agreements for or letters of intent for. So that, I mean, there should have been no expectation that after the fact we were going to come and do something.
Well,
because we never said up front we were going to.
You got to remember the mindset, though, at the time, though, Ed, if I could, or city manager, is that this is a regional problem and the fairness issue of whether or not you require a property owner, a business owner, to take care of other people's problems. You can't do that. Legally, you just can't do it. And so everybody viewed it that way. City staff viewed it that way. I viewed it that way, that this was a regional problem. If you would have just said, hey, Willick, we don't believe this is regional, it would have stopped everything back then. It would have stopped it a year ago. I mean, I put a lot of time and work into trying to make things work here and solve things, you know. And I know you did too. So I'm more upset at the fact that this has gone down that path, and not one time did anyone say, we're not going to do this because we don't see it regional. When we've had multiple conversations, we've got to make sure this is a regional issue. Multiple. I mean, how many meetings have I been in on that? Oh.
All right, Ms. Stevenson, did you have a response?
Mayor, Councilman DeCiccio, I want to try and shed some light on this regional discussion because I think part of the challenge is that it is a regional watershed that is flowing through that property, but it's no different than water flowing through any other property. And so you'll recall the map that Mr. Bull put up a little while ago that had a bunch of lines and talked about the 1,600 acres feeding into their property. And so this map outlines that. The yellow, it just looks at, it doesn't have a little bit of the stuff in South Mountain here, so it doesn't look exactly the same. Staff just focused on what happens when you get to the development areas. And so as you look at what happens here, each one of these projects, as they come in and develop, there's water that's coming from South Mountain through this region, and each development's required to address their 100-year, 2-hour storm event for their on-site development, and then pass and convey that regional water through as it continues on. In this particular instance, there are a couple of different channels that handle some of this runoff. So there's one that breaks off here that goes into the lakes development that I know you're very familiar with. It handles retention up in that area, so it goes on here. There's also a couple that break out down here. There's the two that we focused on, but there's also another one here that breaks out of this area and kind of goes along down in this area. And so when they term it regional, yes, it's not local water that's flowing from the property directly north of them onto their property. It's from this larger regional watershed, but we require everyone to address and convey their water of that nature as it goes through, just like everyone else has done along the way. So
Mayor?
I think that's where the discrepancy with them saying regional and staff not really refuting that was talking about, yes, it is water flowing in this more regional nature, but all developers have to address that off-site flow and convey it through.
Agreed.
Just a moment. Councilman Stark had a couple of comments, questions. I'll come back to
Okay.
Councilman Cicio, please.
If I might, so if it really were more significant than the developer paying for it, would you not have gone to like flood control district? Would you, Ray, not have made some kind of request to seek some other funding? Would you have had a CIP project that you could have then been able to reimburse some with paybacks?
Mayor and
Please.
Councilwoman Stark, what we had done before was that we did have a partnership with, to do the Pecos Basin with ADOT and the Flood Control District, and that was the piece that we added, as well as what was noted before on Chandler Boulevard, the Bucks Culverts that we have there, that we did partnership with ADOT. And so we did do pieces of those, of that conveyance across that whole watershed.
So in your mind, you had already handled the bigger regional issue by working with ADOT and flood control.
Yes.
And so I had a chance to talk to Flood Control District, and they were approached in 2014, the very end of 2014, to revisit the issue and see if there was some way that they could help some of the developments in the city. And they said, no, at this point, it's a city issue that the regional structures have been handled. So I'm a little confused as well, but I think that, in fact, the regional was already handled because of ADOT flood control in the city of Phoenix, early on, correct?
Mayor and Councilwoman Stark, yes, as what was discussed, I mean, the Chandler Boulevard crossing was already participated within that public right-of-way, as we mentioned.
Mayor?
Thank you very much. Councilman Cicio,
If I
please.
could, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you say that early on, while this process was moving along? No one said that. Never came up. Like I said, show me one document where you just outlined, Ray, and again, I'm not trying to be upset with any one individual. I'm really not. I'm really doing everything I can to bite my tongue right now. But show me one document that shows that everything that I've got here shows that this was regional, okay? So may it been that way or not, I don't know that, okay? But I do know the fact that no one's ever said anything to me until I read the report. Two, if we could keep that map up there, if you have one home, one property owner, at the very top, they're gonna have a cup full of water. Thousands of homes down, you're gonna have thousands of cups of water that hit one property owner. So the regional aspect of it does matter. So should that last property owner deal with the 999 cups of water that have come down versus the one that he is responsible for displacing? So when you're looking at channeling, when you're at the very top, your channel may be this big. By the time you get to the bottom, because you got to handle all the water flow from everybody else's property, it becomes even bigger and it becomes more pronounced, which creates a regional problem. So that's where the problematic part of this was in. But again, it all goes back into this, is someone should have said something early on. Stopped it. We could have stopped the project, could have saved these guys money, could have saved us, everybody, a lot of time and effort on this thing. I would never, ever support something that's not regional in perspective. I don't believe in reimbursing one property owner for any reason. Don't. Never have, never voted for that. Would not have done it in this case either. So I'm not going to end up supporting this case, Mayor. There's no way with a staff report the way it is now. It says it's not regional, but that's the first I heard of it.
Thank you very much. I don't want to speak for staff. My impression is that on the issue of regional and not regionalism, to continue with your analogy, if the southern property has 999 cups of water, the one immediately north of that has 998 cups of water. And I think the point that the city manager is making is that if we reimburse this particular property owner, don't we inevitably have to reimburse virtually all the other property owners as well? I think that's the issue that the city manager is making, is that it is a significant concern about the precedent. That's why we have development agreements and there is no development agreement in this case. Obviously, the choice was made in terms of moving forward to get this on today's agenda. The reason we're here is because staff wasn't supporting it, and a decision was made to go to the political body and have the political body put this on the agenda, which I, again, was, as I've done in other instances, was happy to do at your request. Councilman Waring, please.
Thank you. So a couple things. I guess communication seems to be a theme, or lack thereof. So I wasn't going to vote for this project really ever. And there's another project that's out there that they also know I'm not going to vote for. It's a Jeeplet. Just don't vote for them. So that's it. So neither was in my district. And in both cases, I was surprised when they came to me and they said, you know, we've kind of gone down this merry path with staff. We're not really getting answers, yada, yada, yada. In both cases, I called Ed, who pretty much immediately told me, yeah, we're not doing that. In neither case is the staff recommending that we're going to do this. But this seemed to be shocking news to Ed Bull, and in the other case, the other experienced lawyer who works with the city all the time, who you know, has different cases, developers, experienced people. I was just struck by how surprised they were to be getting this news so far down the road. The other thing hasn't been going on as long, but it's been higher profile paper and so forth. I guess in both cases, I found that extremely worrisome, that nobody had communicated to them. Again, people that really are kind of business partners, because we talk about growing the economy, and I know people don't like it when you build something next to their house, but end of the day, that is a pretty decent chunk of our economy, and we need to make working in Phoenix a good experience. And in both cases, these people just seem frustrated. It's been a long process. I mean, for me, it's not been that long. It's been a couple of weeks that I've been hearing about it, and I don't have nearly your personal level of investment or frustration with this. And I knew what I was going to vote, so for me, if you're going to vote no, it's sort of easy to just move on to the next issue. But I would implore all of you, if you've decided you're not going to do something or that there's no more negotiating, yesterday, and again, this isn't a reflection of Ed. Ed shouldn't have to be getting this call at all. I called Ed and I said, what happens if we continue this? Because they were like, well, are we going to get to do more negotiating with staff? Maybe we'll throw in more money and maybe there'll be some agreement. Again, not one that I would vote for. But out of basic fairness, after all this time, it seemed like that made sense as a request. And the message was delivered. I appreciate it. It sounds like clearly and succinctly, no, we're done. We're not doing this, period. But it just seems like that could have got delivered a long time ago by staff, saved these folks a lot of time and effort. They would have had clarity. When I have meetings in my office or whatever, I always try to tell people, to the extent I can, if I have what I think is complete information, I'm just not going to be there for you. That's it. So I'm sorry, but move on, talk to somebody else. I would hope that we would do this the same. There have been lots of incidences of this, but I've got two kind of bouncing around right now that it just seems, without calls that I sort of made, there'd still be this ambiguity, and it just doesn't seem like there should be ambiguity. It seems like the decision was clear cut. You guys had to decide on behalf of staff. Now, people can then decide, well, I want to take it to a council meeting by getting a 4-person letter or whatever, because I want to vote. I'm always happy to give someone a vote. That's fine. Even though I'm voting no, I agree with Mayor Stanton. Put it on an agenda and let's vote. But I don't understand what's going on here. So please, just going forward, folks have a lot of money and time tied up in these things. Frankly, so do we. There are other things I could be doing than fielding calls like that. I think we probably all feel that way. That's just frustrating. And I just think that there were opportunities way before now. The fact that basic information was still being imparted yesterday afternoon, that I was still hearing about it last night, that just doesn't make sense to me. I mean, maybe if it was one example or it was a less experienced legal team or something, but I got two with highly experienced people who are just like, this has never happened before. Where's this coming from? That's a little worrisome. I don't want to get a third situation like that. It just doesn't seem appropriate, given that there was lots of time to address this way before now.
And Mayor, one last point though, too. Staff has always said they were neutral on this. They're not opposed to it. So I want to make sure that's clear. This case.
They're obviously going to take ultimately the direction from the city council, so we can vote and give them direction to pursue a reimbursement agreement with this developer. They're not supporting that we reimburse the developer. They're not recommending it. So I don't want to get, kind of a semantical argument
Well,
about that.
What does neutral mean then? I mean, if they're going to oppose it, then they should say they're going to oppose it.
Well, if we want to have the semantic
That's
debate, we
another
can. I mean, I think-
ambiguity. I mean, neutral means, well, we're not for it or against it.
In this case, they're not recommending it, so therefore it wasn't put on an agenda. I think our city manager, if given direction by the city council to pursue a reimbursement agreement with this developer, he would do it with a smile on his face, if you will, if voted on by this council. But he's not going to recommend that to this city council for the reasons why he stated earlier. So I'm not.
Mayor, they take recommendations all the time. They always say, hey, look, we either oppose this or we move forward. They do this all the time. They do it with the liquor license even. I mean,
Okay.
that's where the ambiguity is. All right, I'm
not
done
sure,
with
yeah,
that, but
on
either
a-
way, going
$1 million
neutral
reimbursement.
means do what you have to do.
Well, I don't think our city manager is telling us if we want to substitute our judgment for theirs, which we certainly can, we can do that, but that he's not, as a professional staff, is not recommending. That's a very important distinction. Mr. City Manager, I don't speak for you, you can speak for yourself. I
Mayor,
apologize.
you stated correctly. We don't recommend it. However, if the council tells us to do something, we will do it. And I think that was what the intent was to communicate.
No, it wasn't, Ed. Your staff, Mario, you guys said you're going neutral. What does that mean? That's not true. You lied. You lied, Ed,
I did
just
not
now.
lie.
Yeah, you
No,
did.
I did not.
You lied to them
No.
too. You told them you were going neutral. Neutral
Councilman-
means you're not taking a position one way or the other.
Lie is a pretty strong word.
It is, because that's what
not
just
I did.
occurred here.
No.
I know, I was in those rooms. You can't do that, Ed. Can't do it. I'm not going to let you get away with it either. Not going to.
Okay,
said-
that's
I said we
obviously
don't
a challenge of
recommend it.
lies going directly to the city manager's ethics. So I'm going to ask city manager the opportunity to respond to that very serious allegation, please.
I don't know every conversation people had with Councilman DeCiccio. We do not recommend this item.
So was there?
Councilman Pastor, please.
Was there at one point where staff was neutral?
If I can jump in here.
Please.
Mayor and Councilman DeCiccio, Councilwoman Pastor. So at the point, several months ago, I believe it was April of 2016, when it was clear that this was not something that the staff was going to be recommending to the city council, was not going to be bringing forward. That was made clear to IPA, to Mr. Bull, to Councilman DeCiccio. And so the question at that time was whether if this were to go to the council, with staff not bringing it forward, was that the only way that this could be brought forward to the council and staff? So I expressed that if this is something that that the city council is interested in doing and approving, and it were to be on an agenda, staff would be neutral as to implementation if the council decides to move this forward. But in providing the staff report to you, in briefing the city council, in the presentation that was done today, it's necessary to explain the reasons why staff did not recommend bringing this forward and all of the rationale that goes behind that. And so that was what was here today. It's also an obligation of staff to bring forward the considerations that need to be a part of the discussion. And so that was all the information that was provided, and that is why staff has not recommended moving this forward, has not recommended approval of a development agreement.
So,
Please.
so there seems to be some miscommunication going on. I mean, I'm just sitting here listening and just sitting up here. There is obviously some miscommunication. Where in this whole process was the developer ever told to develop it and that they would be reimbursed? Is there any documentation of that?
That's a fair question. So, sort of the city manager or any of the department heads, is, to your knowledge, I know you've spent a lot of time researching this in light of the fact that it's going to appear before this council, did anyone on our city staff commit or recommend or suggest that there should be a reimbursement of this developer? Mr. City Manager?
No, not that I'm aware of, no. And the staff has said no.
My second question, is it common practice for the developer to develop a piece of property without an agreement?
I'm not aware of it. I'll ask Mr. Blue. He's been engaged with it, whether that's happened.
No, that's not a common practice.
Okay. And then my third is, Mr. Bull, you mentioned as you were doing your 15 minutes, that in a statement you mentioned that there wasn't any city monies, but someone told you to move forward. Who told you to move forward on the project?
Mayor, Councilmember Pastor, in a meeting on April 2nd of 2015, there were a group of us in the District 6 office, including the councilman, a couple department heads, a couple of representatives from IPA and me, discussing the situation, discussing what appeared to be to everybody, seemed like the regional nature of it, and was the city in a position financially to fix it soon. And we understood from that meeting that the city was not in a position to fix it soon, even though there clearly from photos and other historical experience was a health safety issue on Chandler Boulevard and 50th Street with all kinds of rippling effects. So the discussion then turned to, would IPA be in a position, if we worked through the processes, to essentially advance the money and get or hope to, in anticipation, I want to choose my words very carefully, in anticipation of getting reimbursed, knowing we'd need to go through not only design, but public bidding, and ultimately have a development agreement proposed to the city council, which takes an LOI and then a development agreement. So in that context, knowing that there's a problem that exists, Jim Kinney indicated it had been there for at least 20 years, I think is when their plat was recorded, and he thought was going to be fixed when the city paid to install the box culverts through the IGA with ADOT. That, at least I understand, was El Dorado's understanding. My client was willing to step up and try to figure out a way to help. And to do that through making the plans, making the improvements in anticipation of getting reimbursed. The councilman we were meeting with, I know, was meeting with us in good faith. I know the staff people in the room were meeting with us in good faith. And I know that we proceeded in good faith down that path and continue to be on that path. And I, too, understood staff's position as being neutral, which to me means it's not opposition, it's not support. If they're not directly supporting, they can't put it on a formal agenda. But it was in the District 6 office that we had the initial discussions to preliminarily map out a potential path, which various staff and IPA and I were on for over a year.
So I'm hearing it happened in a District 6 office or staff and city staff. I'm hearing this. Who was part of the meeting? I mean, because I'm getting confused, and I'll tell you why I'm asking these questions. It concerns me to know if city staff gave the go-ahead and gave a green light without a public bid. And it concerns me that there was, it sounds like in the whole listening that there was an understanding, but where's the understanding and where is it written and documenting that there was an understanding? So
The attendees in the original meeting in District 6, and, I'm sorry, Mayor, Councilmember Pastor, and Councilman DeCiccio, please correct me if your memory is different than mine, but my recollection of the attendees in the original meeting in April of 2015 included the District 6 councilman, the planning director, the economic development director, Bill Fettis, who's a principal at IPA, Gene Constantine, who is their director of development at IPA, and myself. I can't remember for sure if the councilman's chief of staff was in the meeting or not. But that was my recollection of the attendees in the first meeting. We then, because you mentioned public bidding, we discussed, as I recall, very preliminarily, if we were going to get reimbursed or had the potential to get reimbursed, that we would need to public bid the improvements. We were provided information on who to contact at the city for guidelines on how to do that. Gene Constantine from IPA and I had an initial meeting with, I believe it's Keeney Knudsen, who I think is in the streets department, and one of his folks, and then Gene Constantine followed up with him, and it was the city staff who, per a fee paid by IPA, made sure the public bidding was done correctly. With respect to documentation, Councilman DeCiccio referred to a variety of emails and draft letters of intent, the first one coming from the city, then the two follow-ups from me. None of those letters of intent made it to the city council. None of them were signed. Instead, when I one day got a call from a department head talking about this and various things, including us collecting sales tax revenues and rental tax from 6 properties, 4 of which were not at 50th Street and Chandler Boulevard. We then narrowed it to 2, and then it seemed like after that, I then was back in the District 6 office with Deputy City Manager and the City Attorney, and we were talking about things and possibilities and whether and how to go forward. And again, I understood through those discussions and multiple discussions after that staff's position would be neutral, that staff wouldn't put it on an agenda, but staff's position would be, or management's position was neutral, which to me means neutral. That's not how I read the staff report, and that's not how discussions last Monday with multiple staff or today have gone. So we are where we are, but we got here through, I can assure you, a good, honest developer operating in good faith, knowing that they needed to proceed or put their development on hold, and chose to proceed believing that at the end of the day they would be treated fairly, or what we perceive to be fairly by the city on solving this problem that we didn't create.
Councilman, any other questions at this time? Councilman Williams, please.
You said in the meeting of April 2015, the word reimbursed was used. And at that point, were you still considering it, and staff considering this as a regional problem?
In Mayor, Councilmember Williams, I am 99.9% sure that the word reimbursements was used. It had to be, but because we were talking about a way, if IPA advanced the money, could we get reimbursed? I'm almost positive is the word that was said, and to get reimbursed, we would have to go through public bidding and so on.
Thank you. Now, I've had several stories told to me about the process, how this has gone through and the timelines. At what point in all of this did they tell you that they no longer considered this regional?
The first time that I became aware of that, or that my client became aware of that, is when we could first download the staff report for this meeting, which was last Thursday night. And I wasn't really sure if that was actually, if I was understanding correctly what I was reading. But because of various discussions we had with folks, and we ended up then being in a meeting with, 8, I suppose, city staff on Friday morning. Last Friday morning. And in that meeting, we were told that staff did not consider it to be a regional problem or regional stormwater, or whatever words they used. Bill, unless you remember something differently, or Lynn, you remember something differently, we had not, until that point, heard that staff's position is this is not regional.
And again, during what, 2 years, almost a year and a half, 2 years of discussions going through this, staff telling you what the process would be to obtain a contract for reimbursement, did they ever say no? Did they ever say that they were not going to proceed on this, they would not recommend it?
Let me, Mayor, Council Member, let me break that question into pieces I may, because I, again, want to be very precise. Never to me and never to Bill Fettis, and I understand never from Gene Constantine, who's in Michigan today, did any of us, or Lynn and Dave, I don't think you ever heard anyone say it's not regional, and the answer is no, the city will not reimburse you for this. So if you're asking, did they promise we'd be reimbursed? No, or did they say we wouldn't be? No, I never heard that. The other part of the question, I think, is did anyone on staff promise me, or to my knowledge, IPA, that I promise you, or I guarantee you, that I, as a member of staff, guarantee you that you will be reimbursed, or that I, as staff, guarantee you that I will recommend that you get reimbursed. I made that very clear in a meeting last Monday morning and prior and subsequent, last Friday morning and prior and subsequent discussions as well. I will also tell you that we thought we were on the right path, and Councilman DeCicio's talked about a variety of emails exchanged and stuff, and I can talk about them more if you want, but there's a difference to us being told. We were never told no, we were never promised yes, but we were on a path that we understood was the right path to be on. We were well down that path, and then we were told, well, staff would be neutral until we learned otherwise when we read the report.
And was there one person that was a point person that you were dealing with on city staff? Or were you interfacing with multiple people in different departments?
Yeah, for different people in different stages along the way. If we're talking about design kinds of things, that was in part through the Planning and Development Department. I'm not the engineer who was involved. I think Streets is also involved in some of that design or design review. And then also ADOT was involved because it's kind of a combination Phoenix ADOT facility. I wasn't in meetings with ADOT, but ultimately everything in terms of the design, the determination of flows and the design and approval of the drainage report that I had up on the screen earlier, that kind of stuff, to my knowledge, was a combination of Plan and Development, Streets, and ADOT. and if I'm leaving somebody out, I apologize for that. Flood Control District might have had some involvement in it, but I'm not aware of it, other than we went to flood to see if they had any money that could be used to help out with this. On the exchange, on the getting us introduced to the right person with respect to public bidding processes and procedures, which IPA had a choice to do that themselves or through their engineer or pay a fee for the city to do it. We were introduced to the right person, who I think is in streets, but we were introduced to him and his staff through economic development. And then with respect to exchanging draft LOIs and the preparation, providing financial information on cost to construct Gen 2 and a future commercial development, sales tax revenues coming out of it, and rental tax, those calculations were provided by economic development.
Thank you. I guess, Mayor, from my perspective, what's upsetting to me is, I'm sure it was very unintentional by staff. They were all probably doing their very best to help someone, but they led him down a path that led him to believe that he was going to be reimbursed. Now, I have no idea if you would have built the same project knowing you wouldn't be reimbursed or not. And if they knew that it was not regional and it wasn't eligible, the fact that nobody said anything, I think, is a real problematic to me. And I have always thought that the city's word was good, that our intentions were great, and to me, this is almost like we had too many people handling different segments, and it had an implied intent that there would be an agreement on this. And that is very, very upsetting to me. I won't support it if it's not a regional, but I haven't heard for sure that that's absolutely the case. So I'm very concerned about that.
Thank you very much. This issue of regional and non-regional, I think, is very important because some people, including, I guess, IPA, seems to be, for lack of a better term, hanging their hat on whether this is regional, non-regional. I wanted the city manager to address that one more time because I want to make sure it's clear, is that his position, all flood control at some level is regional. And I think his point is that a precedent would be set that if we reimbursed this particular developer, how do we say no to the property just north of that and the property just north of that and the property just north? This is why we have development agreements in place, so we can sort of say this one gets it and this one gets it. You suggested that we don't do after the fact reimbursements like this. Mr. Manager, I wanted you an opportunity to speak for yourself and whether you feel that the professional staff that you're leading left a false impression with this developer. They were going to get reimbursed to the tune of $1 million for this flood control infrastructure.
Mayor, Mr. Bull and I had a good conversation last night, and he was very forthright that no one on staff had ever promised that it, as he just stated here. I don't know what impression people had, but the issue of regional, non-regional is not the issue, because people are required to convey and deal with stormwater on their property at their expense, as every property did to the north and to the west of this, and in fact, all over the city. So that is not particularly the thing that swings this question. And I think you articulated it. You would have to lay those things out specifically in a development agreement in advance that the council would sign off on in order for us to agree to sign on to participating with public money in a project.
So, Mr. Bull, who sort of, for lack of a better term, who led your client down this path to seek a reimbursement without a development agreement?
My client and I discussed it, and we discussed that there was not yet a signed development agreement. We discussed, though, the path that we were on and had been on and had not yet heard of problems with. And IPA made the decision in light of needing to get underway with their development and lender commitments and those kinds of things. They had to either sit and wait for the city at some point to fix the problem, because seemingly at some point the city would, because of consumer and business complaints and resident complaints, sit and wait, killing their development, or do something. And they chose to proceed, and putting the pipes in the ground is one of the first things that has to happen in this kind of a development. But the issue of regional versus non-regional in the context with, and Manager Zerker's correct, he and I did, I believe it was last night, had a very open and candid, and I believe both way honest conversation, as I would like to think I always do. In any event, the issue or the characterization of this water, or of this being a regional problem, and I don't think it is the same problem north of us, because they're passing some of this water through and so on and so forth. But if we would have been told, or I believe, Mayor, if the District 6 office would have been told, this isn't a regional issue. If I believe, from what I perceived before, heard today, if the District 6 office would have heard that, he'd have been on the phone to me and said, this isn't happening, or if I'd have heard it and wouldn't have reported it, he would have been less than happy with me for sitting on that information. Whether it's regional or not regional, I suppose our experts say it's regional. Their report that's approved by the city says it's regional. I do believe this is more than simply a regional watershed issue. It's putting a whole bunch of water onto this property that's regional water. But underlying it all is the fundamental fairness, and is there proportionality between this property to build their senior housing facility and other things there. Is it roughly proportional and fair and reasonable for them to pick up the tab for $1.7 million to do this?
Mayor.
So, Councilwoman, please.
Mayor, I had my hand up for a while.
I apologize, Councilman Nowakowski, I apologize, and then Councilwoman Stark, I apologize. Councilman
She's gone already. I haven't gone yet, so I'd like to just clarify some stuff. So Thursday was the first time you heard that it was not regional. Who told you that from the staff, saying it wasn't regional?
That's how we were reading some language that was in staff's report, that the first time we could get that report was
Mr. Bull, you said staff's report. Who in the staff actually told you that?
I'm sorry, say it.
Who from our staff actually told you it wasn't a regional? Just read in a report?
We believe that's what we were reading in the staff report Thursday night, and then in a meeting Friday morning that included, I can name all the people that were in the room if you want, but it was, almost everybody at the table except
Chris,
for Ed.
Ray,
Chris was,
Alan, Mario.
Yeah, Mario, Alan, Ray, Chris participated telephonically, Paul, city attorney, Bill Fettis, Gene Constantine,
I just want to know from
Councilman
our staff.
DeCicio's chief of staff.
So the other question I have is, who provided you the first draft of the LOI? And when was that actually presented to you, the first draft? Who actually presented it to you? When was it presented to you?
Economic development, and I need to get you the date.
All right.
The first draft LOI is dated July 31, 2015, and I'm thinking it was provided to us, it was either late July or early August of 2015.
Mr. Bull, so when did the construction actually happen?
After it was put, let me grab something else, if I may.
Mayor?
It's up to the Councilman Noakowski. Do you want to wait for the answer? You have Councilman.
I just want to just give a comment in there. What you'll see is that the LOIs were going back and forth while it was still under construction. It started, I believe, the end of late 2015. So at some point in there, if it's true what the city manager said, is that, well, wait a second, we don't ever reimburse backwards. They were already under construction. The city knew about it as they were going back and forth with the LOIs. So it doesn't jive with the argument that we don't go backwards and take care of it. Now, that's the first I've heard of that, too. Go ahead.
Thank you.
So for the question, time, I want to make sure I understand the timing, and it's important for me at least. The first draft of this LOI was done after construction already started?
Well, that's what I want to
I
figure
apologize.
out.
I want to make sure I understand that. Yeah, it's an important fact.
Right.
The draft, I'm sorry.
Draft of
Mayor,
the LOI.
I think you asked if the first draft of the LOI was started after construction of the pipes.
I think I was asking more of a confirmatory thing, because I think that's what the councilman suggested, is that that is sort of inconsistent with staff's position that they would not reimburse someone after the fact. That would be an unprecedented thing, and I want to make sure that we get the timing out there.
The first draft of the LOI, which is dated, I think I said dated July 30th, was transmitted to us on August 18 of 2015.
Yeah.
And the bids for the 84-inch pipes were received on February 9th of 2016. Pre-construction conference with ADOT and Phoenix and the contractor on March 21 of 16. I think construction of the development and pipes being on the front end of that occurred in the, started in March or April of 2016. Does that sound right, Bill?
Yeah, they were concurrent.
They were concurrent.
Because we could do quite a bit before we had to.
There were additional communications exchanged, including draft LOIs and calculations of tax projections and so on, that were underway after construction of the facility had started, including the pipes. And then I can pull it somewhere, but I believe, Councilman, the first meeting that we had in your office then, after the development was underway with Mario and the city attorney, was in July of 2016, if I remember correctly, during the city council's summer break.
Well, I only met once the first time, and then afterwards.
And we met.
Which it was July after that, a year later.
Yeah, yeah.
Councilman Stark had a question. You have follow-up, and then Councilman Stark, please.
My last comments is that, we just took pride in talking about our economic development of the city of Phoenix, how we work as a team, and the customer service that we provide. And I believe very strongly in our staff that we have, in our Team Phoenix approach with the leadership of Paul and Mario and the rest of our staff, from Alan, Chris, and Ray. And I believe that there's a way for us to figure this out, to come up. It's confusing for all of us up here that hasn't dealt with this at all. It's been going on for 2 years. I'd like to see some type of a timeline. I'd like to see some documentation supporting that timeline. I'd like to figure out, did construction really happen prior or during, or what's going on? Who created the first LOI? When that draft happened, what was in that draft? I haven't been able or privy to look at none of these documents. I think if the city of Phoenix or if one of our staff members guided an individual down the wrong path, I think there's a way for us to fix it by sitting around a table and having that conversation and finding some common ground. If it's a regional approach, if it's regional or not regional, I like to figure that out myself. I have the 202 going, the South Mountain 202 going into the Levine and the Estrella Mountain area that I represent, and we're going to have the same situations popping up in that area. So I just want to make sure that I'm very clear when I'm working with individuals that are going to be developing in those areas, that if there's a regional approach to something, that we know very clearly there's a regional approach. How do we as council members know that prior to meeting with developers or individuals that want to build in our community? So I don't know how. I think we're going to be here all night just asking questions because it goes back 2 years, and I think I'd like to have staff figure this out, come back to us with a timeline, explain to us why there was a mix-up of regional and non-regional, and why Thursday was the first time they ever heard that it wasn't a regional situation. And I just want to make sure that people out there know that Phoenix is open for business. And when we come up with a little hiccup, which I believe this is a little hiccup, that we figure things out. So I'm not sure which way to go from this point, Mayor.
Okay, we can go anywhere we want. Councilwoman Stark had some questions, and then
One
we'll see if any other comment. We'll be here as long as we need to be to solve this issue. It's an important issue. It's $1 million question.
No, exactly. And thank you, Mayor. So when you met with the developer, was this the only option they had available to them? Did you talk about different scenarios to fix the drainage problem, to move the water?
Mayor, Councilwoman Stark, yes, as part of, the review through my department, they have to address the drainage issues. There was discussion about other options and what could happen. Originally, staff had requested 3 pipes to convey the water through their site based upon that 1998 study that was done by the Flood Control District and City. But their engineer, Mr. Erie, who you heard from a little bit ago, did a watershed analysis and determined that based upon improvements that had been done in the watershed by other developments, that they did not need to have 3 pipes, they could only do 2 pipes. That study was reviewed by Planning and Development Department staff as well as Street Transportation staff, and ultimately approved, as part of this project.
But could they have also looked at other ways to convey the water? I mean, were there other solutions that might have been cheaper?
Mayor, Councilwoman Stark, they could have done other options similar to what other developers have shown there with a concrete channel and a drainage easement or other options that could have been explored.
So ultimately, they chose this solution, or was this your advice? Or did you compromise?
Mayor, Councilwoman Stark, I believe that it was their choice on how to address it in this manner.
Thank you very much. Councilman Waring, please.
Thank you. So I want to address a couple things that have been said over the last period of time. So first, always had excellent working relationship with Ed Zerker, and so I call him probably more than he would prefer. I'm always sort of amazed. It could be the smallest issue. He always seems to have a grasp on it, well briefed, which is really a testament to the people talking to him, which is you guys, so take that as a compliment. In both these cases I mentioned today, I called Ed. Within 5 minutes of conversation, he had explained why. Now, city staff can be against it. The mayor is actually right, though. That's absolutely right. If it's up here, we can vote against staff. I vote against staff recommendations sometimes. But within 5 minutes of each case, all right, a fair number of times I vote against the staff recommendation. But thank you for clarifying, Mayor. But Ed, in both cases, within 5 minutes, I definitely got it. The first time, it was a little more ambiguous, which was not this one, but the other one. But in both cases, I walked away thinking the staff is completely opposed to that thing. They've clearly told Ed they're completely opposed to it. He's got the reasons. In both cases, I agree with the reasons, so like I said, I'm voting no anyway, but then I hear that, and for once, happily, Mayor, I actually agreed with the staff recommendations. If that's what it was gonna be, it was negative. But again, it struck me that when I pretty much immediately in both cases called the lawyers for the developers, they seemed dumbfounded by this news. I'm like, well, you really need to talk to Ed. In both cases, that has now, or one I guess is gonna happen, one has happened, and this all seemed to be new news to them. Again, one, I might be like, well, that's your bad, you probably dropped the ball, things happen. But two, that is strange to me. To the issue about the neutrality of the staff recommendation and whether it's neutral and what neutral means. So I had the staff briefing. I don't know if the rest of you did, I don't know who had it and who didn't. But I had probably 20 minutes in my office. What do you think about this? Knowing what I already thought about it, not knowing exactly what to expect from the staff. I came out of that not thinking they were neutral, but they were adamantly, absolutely opposed. And pretty much, I was okay with that. I agreed with everything that they said, most everything. The precedent, if we do it for one, why are we not doing it for everybody else? So I was good with that, no issue. But to say that briefing was neutral, I don't think is right. I don't even think it was being characterized as neutral. I thought the words against, but I couldn't swear to that. I didn't, if that was supposed to be neutral, it definitely wasn't neutral. So, and if you're saying that to me and clearly saying it to Ed, which is what I took away from our conversations, say it to those guys in the audience. You knew what they were asking for. They want somebody else to pay for this, right or wrong. I'm not judging. I'm just saying that's what they want. You knew that probably 2 years ago. I don't know how that wouldn't have been clear 2 years ago. So it just seems like there was one path. I think some of the other questions have sort of highlighted that. Just say, we just don't want to do that. Once they start building, there you're setting a precedent that we're going back in time. You knew that the other properties hadn't gotten this for however long that they've been there and been built. So again, it just seems like do some research and say, you know what, this is just not our cup of tea. I agree with that, so that's fine for me. I'm not even getting into the regional thing and so forth. That's not my issue. I would say if you're going to be neutral, then be neutral, just lay out the facts. I mean, again, in both cases, it just, the projects got hammered. Maybe rightfully so, but definitely neutral isn't a word I would characterize in either case of what I was hearing back about this. So just going forward, that needs to be, I guess, redefined. And I do appreciate, Ed sort of on both things, summing up in 5 minutes these complex issues, and I understood that he was going to talk to Ed Bull, the lawyer, and it sounds like you did, and that had a more clarifying effect than 2 years of conversation. And I just don't see why that should be either. Thank you.
Hey, Raj, Councilwoman Pastor?
I would like to know at what point or when did staff know this was a no project? That's my first question. And the second question, when they knew it was a no project, why didn't the staff tell Councilman DeCiccio?
Mr. Manager, you want to handle that one?
Mayor, Councilwoman Pastor, as we've described, there were several meetings and communications with various staff members and various departments, and it was around. I can at least speak to around April of 2016, where I was involved and Paul Blue was involved, and I communicated to Councilman DeCiccio that this was not something that staff was going to be recommending moving forward. We also had a conversation with Ed Bull and IPA around that time to communicate that this was not something that staff recommended moving forward with.
So you recommended saying that this was not moving forward, that it was a no?
Correct.
No, well.
Councilman DeCiccio, please.
I'm sorry. We had multiple conferences. That did happen. And to your credit, I don't remember if it was April. I thought it was later, but I don't know. What did happen there, I said, hey, wait a second, we've been down this path now. We've been down this thing for about a year or more. I said, how do you justify the fact that this is not a regional issue here where we're going to be taking the water? I remember the phone call that we had. You said, well, let me go back and go talk to staff about it. I think we went back and forth on that quite a bit. That was the first conversation because I remember I was out of town and I took that call. And then There was communication that had proceeded beyond that, too.
So just for clarity, staff said no in April of
No.
2016.
No.
It wasn't no.
Well, that's what I asked. At
It
what
was-
point did staff?
Communicated that staff would not be
Support.
recommending moving forward. Now, there were also questions about, from the councilman, about whether we could look into it further, and we agreed, staff agreed that we would continue to examine and look into the issue and the history, and we continued to do so, and then we came back again and communicated, reiterated that the staff recommendation at that point was that we were not going to be bringing any development agreement forward. So
And that you wanted to move it to the council for the decision.
and then that led to the discussion that I referred to earlier, that this wasn't something that was going to be brought forward by staff, so therefore it wasn't going to be on a city council formal agenda. The question was asked about whether this could be considered by the council any other way. There was a discussion about that if this ended up on a policy agenda, and I apologize for any confusion about being neutral and staff being neutral. That's something that I think was probably based on something that I said, and my communication was intended to state that if this is something that the council desires to move forward and approve forward, staff is not in opposition to it because it's a council policy matter. But from a technical perspective, staff does not recommend moving it forward and hasn't, and that was communicated since that time. So again, I apologize for any confusion about the neutrality of staff, but at the same time, staff has an obligation to explain why we're not recommending moving it forward, and that's what you've seen communicated in the staff report. That's what you've seen communicated in this presentation. Again, that's my fault for the confusion about that word, but where we are is that staff does not recommend moving it forward.
And I want to get it clear. That was April 2016.
That was initially when we communicated that, was April 2016. There were a few more discussions, I think, leading up to July of 2016.
Yeah.
And so, yes.
It was July.
So July 2016, approximately right around there is when I said, look, where are you guys going to be at this? Well, you can move it to the council. Let them make the determination. I said, fine. The whole idea of whether or not it was a precedent setting, none of that came up. It just did not come up. It was just that staff didn't feel comfortable with this. They didn't see it as an issue. That's what that was about.
So,
And that was
if I
done
can
by
just
via phone.
Also,
Mr. Paniagua,
jump
please.
in about the mayor. Thank you. The regional discussion. Staff is acknowledging and today acknowledged that we're dealing with a regional drainage issue because we're talking about a watershed that covers more than one property. So in the sense that it's a multitude of properties that are impacted by this stormwater that goes through this watershed, it's regional. There's no doubt about that, and I think that's what staff has acknowledged all along, that's what we're talking about. But regional in the sense that the responsibility belongs to more than that property owner to convey that water through. Staff has never agreed in that sense that it's a regional responsibility. It's a regional drainage issue. The water covers a broad array of properties throughout that area, but it's not a regional responsibility. It's the responsibility of the property owner to convey that water through their property, even if it originates off-site. And so I hope that adds a little bit of clarification. I think the word regional gets tossed around and means different things to different people at different times, but from the sense that it's a regional area, staff acknowledges that. A regional responsibility, we disagree.
And that's the best description I've heard on it too, because when we're dealing with regional, we all take a different impression what that means. So again, a lot of this stuff, if it would have came out way early on when the LOIs were being pushed around or back and forth, I think we could have really resolved it back then. It was just the amount of time that everybody put into this thing too, Mario. Look, I'm upset at the fact that I felt a little blindsided by all of it, okay? But I do believe that they were trying to make something happen, trying to make something work, try to work with people on it. And the fact that we all have different descriptions of what regional is in our own mind. I mean, mine is definitely one that it's a regional issue. It is not an individual property owner's problem. Well, either way.
All right, any other comments or questions? Councilman Cito, do you have a motion on item number 3?
Well, my motion is going to be to turn it down.
All right, so we have a motion to turn down the proposed reimbursement agreement for the developer at 15815 South 50th Street. Is there a second on that motion? We have a motion, we have a second. Any additional comments by members of the council on that question? Roll call.
Councilman DeCiccio. Yes. Councilman Noakowski. Councilwoman Pastor.
Yes.
Councilwoman Stark.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Valenzuela. Yes. Councilman Waring. Councilwoman Williams. Mayor Stanton.
Yes, so I believe it was a vote of 7-1. The motion to deny the reimbursement request passes the city council. There be no further business for this city council. Our today's meeting is adjourned.